After his daughter died, the father lost his mind, unable to understand why. After his daughter was falsely accused, he'd locked her in the dungeon with his own hands, all to protect her. Down there, neither magic nor weapons could function, so no one with ill intent could ever reach her. He'd even given her a dagger to defend herself. But the father had always been a man of few words, and Belian, starved of affection since childhood, only knew one thing: the dungeon was where the most unforgivable criminals were sent, a place no one ever left. To her, being locked away meant her father had given up on her entirely. So he really doesn't love me at all, she thought. And so when he pressed the blade into her hand, she read it the only way she knew how, as an order to end her own life. No matter how desperately she begged, he never once looked back. Just as all hope drained from her, the crown prince arrived, the very one rumored to be as cold-blooded as he was ruthless. He'd come to personally interrogate the criminal responsible for his sister's death. The sight of his heavy armor and blood-red eyes sent her heart straight into her throat. Better to die outright, she thought, than endure whatever torture he had planned. In truth, all she had ever wanted, despite the scorn heaped on her from every side, was a little love. As he held his daughter's lifeless body, Regis felt as though his very soul had been torn from him. As her body grew colder and colder in his arms, he finally lost what remained of his sanity. He drenched the palace in blood, killing every last person who had played a hand in her death. He wanted nothing less than to burn this wretched world to the ground for taking the one he loved most. And he was willing to pay any price, even reversing time itself, just to see his precious girl alive again. Just 3 days earlier, an ordinary office worker had died in a car accident and woken up, utterly confused, inside the body of Belian, the novel's villainess, the one the male lead had already dumped. By the time her memories caught up with her, she'd already been entangled with him for 2 years. Ikai had been the first person to ever reach out a hand to the real Belian, starved as she was of her father's love, and his kindness had made her happy enough that her feelings for him slowly curdled into obsession. Anyone who so much as got close to Ikai, she'd find some way to torment, all in a desperate attempt to fill the hole where love should have been. But this new soul inhabiting her, a devoted reader of the novel in her past life, was determined to rewrite Belian's tragic ending. She broke things off with Ikai herself, and even wished him well with open generosity. To Ikai, though, such uncharacteristic behavior looked like nothing more than a game, a woman playing hard to get. The moment she got home, she ran straight into the father she'd never truly met. As the Empire's only sole master and her sole living relative, Duke Regis Froilan seemed untouched by time itself, ageless no matter how the years passed. And in Belian's mind, he'd never had the slightest fondness for his own daughter, though that, of course, was only ever her own assumption. This time around, rather than chase after her father's love, Belian intended to spend his fortune down to the last coin. Her only real goal now was to live a long, comfortable life. She greeted him with a bright smile, asking whether his work had been too exhausting. What she got in return was an ice-cold, unreadable stare, so she huffed and made herself scarce. Then, to her surprise, he actually answered, and sharply noted that she'd come home unusually early. It made sense, really. At this hour on any other day, she would still have been trailing after Ikai. Covering her face, she admitted, without much shame, that she and Ikai had broken up. Regis's brow furrowed instantly. He caught her by the fingers and demanded to know why. Only then did Belian remember Ikai was one of her father's most trusted subordinates. But Ikai doesn't actually like me, she said. I don't want to spend my whole life with someone who doesn't. Her father's face darkened at once. He'd probably been hoping Ikai would marry into the family. But Belian wasn't about to bend, not when her own happiness was on the line. She said plainly that she wanted to marry someone who actually loved her. Regis looked mildly startled, though not overly so, and turned away in evident disappointment. He probably just doesn't want to waste any more words on such a hopeless daughter, she thought. He doesn't trust me at all, doesn't care if I live or die. How cold can one man be? Fine, father. I'll live quietly and stay out of your way. Go on ignoring me like you always have. All I want is to survive. In the blink of an eye, she'd become the story's wicked young lady. In her first life, she'd been framed by her boyfriend, abandoned by her father, and had died a miserable death in prison. Given a second chance, she decided to keep everyone at arm's length, break up with her boyfriend, give up hoping for her father's love, and devote herself instead to a leisurely, glamorous life as a socialite, all because she'd yawned a little too widely. And a maid had caught sight of the tears it brought to her eyes. The maid's imagination ran wild. Their usually spoiled, imperious young lady was secretly wiping away tears, and now refusing to even bathe. The breakup must have hit her harder than anyone realized. Crying like that, poor thing, the maid murmured, right as Regis happened to be passing by. My precious daughter, in tears? That simply will not do. Tell me exactly what you saw, he said. So the very next morning, Belian had barely gotten out of bed when a maid informed her that the Duke was inviting her to breakfast. The two of them had never once shared a meal, and the sudden invitation made for an almost unbearably awkward affair. Her father was acting strange too, staring at her without pause, and piling food onto her plate, as though he meant to fatten her up like livestock. Thinking of his daughter sobbing alone in the dead of night, the old Duke let out a sigh, and it startled Belian badly. He must think I'm an embarrassment, she thought. That has to be it. After all, Regis was a towering figure, commander of the Central Royal Knights, the Empire's great hero from a war won 20 years ago. And then there was Belian, the black sheep of high society, hopeless at reading a room, without a single true friend to her name. Worlds apart, the two of them. Father, please stop being so impossibly perfect. Feeling that burning stare on her, Belian startled when her father asked, out of nowhere, what her ideal type of man was. Her fork and knife clattered to the floor. Why are you suddenly asking that? Just curious. He'd never shown the slightest interest in her before, so what had changed? Was he trying to line up some other man for her, some heir to marry into the family? Not a chance. She flashed her signature smile and declared that her ideal type was a man even more impressive than her father, knowing full well that no such man existed. As far as marriage went, she intended to dodge it entirely. But her father saw right through her. With no other choice, Belian backpedaled. I mean, of course no one could ever measure up to you, father. You're the strongest man in the entire empire. Even after that flood of flattery, he didn't look any less irritated. If anything, he looked more annoyed than before. She couldn't afford to upset him right now, so with a resolute look, she declared instead that she wanted to marry a man who excelled in wealth, reputation, family background, looks, and ability, all of it. Regis looked faintly exasperated, though only faintly, and fell into genuine thought. Just as she thought she'd weathered that particular storm, her father invited her out. In her entire life, the two of them had never once gone anywhere together. Father, why are you suddenly doing this to me? Down the bustling market street, one particular pair drew every eye. This one and that one wrapped them all up. A crystal rabbit tucked in a corner caught Belian's eye, and the moment she picked it up, her father's hand was already pointing at something else. And that one too. Whatever she so much as glanced at, he bought. By now, all she wanted was to go home. Just then, a figure in a black cloak passed by, a woman carrying a sword, as it turned out, and she'd come looking for the Duke. Strange, Belian thought. Ever since the late Empress's guard captain, the knight Yulia, had vanished without a trace, the entire order of female knights seemed to have disappeared with her. Before she could think it through, a crowd had already gathered around her and her father, whispering and staring. She needed to find somewhere quiet, fast, so she ducked into the nearest shop she could find. Well, aren't you a lovely little thing? What can I get for you today? Only then did she realize the shop she'd ducked into to escape the crowd was, in fact, a menswear store exclusively for men. It was too late to leave now. The eager shopkeeper was already bearing down on her. In the chaos, a figure was drawing steadily closer, until a man's broad, solid chest was practically pressed against the top of her head. I'll take it. His voice was low and thick with something almost magnetic, and with red eyes and a face cut like a blade, he was so striking that she couldn't tear her eyes away. An instant later, their eyes met, and Belian, suddenly aware of how rude she must look, opened her mouth to apologize. Instead, the man snapped at her to get lost. Excuse me? She had to admit his looks did strange things to her. But get lost? Was that any way to speak to a lady? With a wave of her hand, she declared, whatever he's buying, I'm buying too. She said it with total confidence, right up until the shopkeeper pointed out, but this is armor polish. Belian very nearly fainted on the spot. Flustered, she claimed it was for tarnished jewelry back home. The shopkeeper's eyes lit up as if he'd just spotted a fattened pig ready for slaughter, and he scurried off to the storeroom in delight. What is happening right now? The man thought. He'd never met such a strange woman in his life. He picked up his purchase and turned to leave, only for Belian to call after him. He'd paid with a gold coin, and the shopkeeper hadn't given him his change yet. But the man ignored her completely, so she chased after him, and nearly ran straight into his back. When he stopped short to glare at her, ignoring the sting to her nose, she pressed on. A gold coin could keep a commoner family fed for 2 whole weeks, you know. That's enough to buy 10 bottles of polish. He raised an eyebrow, looking as though he were about to say something, when the shopkeeper reappeared, arms full of a whole crate of polish. While Belian stood there at a loss, the man simply walked away without a backward glance. What she had no way of knowing was that this was the very crown prince rumored to be as cold-blooded as he was cruel, and that the female knight from earlier was one of his own subordinates, sent to arrange a visitation date with Regis. Meanwhile, Regis stood there stroking his chin, utterly baffled. What is this? Armor polish? He let out another long, weary sigh. It was, without question, the longest day she'd had since arriving in this world. The skin on her heels was already worn raw, and now, of all things, she had to climb a flight of stairs. If I want to keep spending my father's money, I'll just have to grit my teeth and put up with him, she told herself. The next moment, her foot slipped on empty air. But the pain she braced for never came. Her father had caught her, steady as ever. What are you doing? Sorry. Her head was spinning so badly she felt like she might actually die. Without a word, he swept her up into his arms, Princess Carrie style. She insisted she was fine, but he simply told her to be quiet. The tender scene left onlookers thoroughly envious. Please put me down, I really am fine. Belian, behave. She could feel his grip tighten around her, and it frightened her, this side of her father. Winning him over was proving far harder than she'd expected. Belian was sweating more and more, her vision blurring and her father's voice growing fainter and fainter. The moment he realized something was terribly wrong with the girl in his arms, Regis felt the air itself vanish from his lungs. Belian had gone pale, limp against his chest. He shouted her name over and over, dread closing in around him. Not again. Not like before. It can't happen again. Belian, please wake up. If I lose you too, I don't know what I'll... Even unconscious, Belian could hear her father's voice with startling clarity. But he'd never call out to her like that, would he? Why did it sound almost like he was crying? With his daughter unconscious, the father was nearly out of his mind. Memories of her death in another life flashed through his head, drowning him in fear and despair. All he wanted was for her to open her eyes again. When Belian finally opened her eyes, 3 full days had passed, and her room was piled high with extravagant gifts. It turned out they'd all been sent by noble ladies wishing her a swift recovery. But I don't even have any real friends, she thought. Just then her father strode over, pressing a broad hand to her forehead, and the sudden gesture of concern felt so unfamiliar, she wondered if she was still dreaming. Once he'd confirmed her fever had broken, he turned and walked out without another word. And to Belian, the whole thing felt like nothing more than a performance. It finally sank in. All those gifts had only come because of her father's name. Strip away his money and status, and she was nothing at all. So Belian decided to start rebuilding her reputation, replying to every lady who'd written to her, and filling her spare hours with books. Studying, though, turned out to be mind-numbingly dull. The old Belian had never bothered cracking open a book, and here she was, unable to escape it after all. She felt 10 years older just thinking about it. She pushed open the study door and found her father's handsome profile waiting inside. She hadn't expected him to be there, and it threw her completely off balance. Seeing the book in her hands, a treatise on estate management, he gave her a look of pure, baffled concern, as if worried something might be wrong with her. Terrified he'd see through her act, Belian tried her best to cover. The next moment, he told her to sit, even though the doctor had specifically warned that she needed rest, not stress. Some rest this was, she thought. The stress alone might give her a heart attack. At this rate, she was going to pass out again. What followed was an impromptu quiz, Regis firing off questions about the book without warning. Thankfully, Belian managed to answer everyone, and 3 hours ticked by like that. When a guest arrived at the estate, she thought she was finally free, only for her father, impressed by her diligence, to hand her yet another book, this one on tactics and warfare. Her hope of rest shattered instantly. He wanted her to read it, so read it she would, whether she dared refuse or not. Just then, something glinted in the light. Her father's pendant, and she set off to return it to him. Rounding a corner, she heard raised voices, an argument. Someone in this world actually dared to argue with her father? She should probably slip the pendant back into the study and forget about it. But then she heard her father call out a name, Max, and curiosity got the better of her. She peeked around the corner, only for the sharp-eyed Max to spin around instantly, and she yanked her head back in a panic. Wait, wasn't that the handsome man from the shop? Swordsmanship exists to protect what matters, not to kill. It seems you've forgotten even that most basic truth. Max's handsome brow furrowed, and he demanded to know why his teacher would deliberately create such a weakness for himself. Bellyanne, listening in, hadn't even known her father had a student. Sometimes, Regis said, protecting a weakness is exactly what makes a person stronger. Those words mean nothing to me. Bellyanne could only roll her eyes at that. Was rudeness really something you inherited from your master? Someday you'll find the one person you want to protect above all else. She couldn't fathom it. Someone like that existing for her father. A man who couldn't even be bothered with his own daughter's life or death. The thought alone made her legs go weak, and she slid quietly down the wall. I don't know about important, Max said suddenly, but I think I found a rat hiding in the corner. Bellyanne froze in terror. Rats were the one thing she was truly afraid of. Max drew his sword, ready to hunt it down. But Regis stopped him cold. Touch her and I won't hold back. Not even for you. In that split second of distraction, Bellyanne finally managed to slip away unseen. To dare call the Duke's own daughter a rat, this man was none other than Crown Prince Max. Before her death, the late Empress had entrusted her only son to Regis's care, and Max had trained under him for 10 years, long enough to know exactly how strict and unyielding his teacher could be. The one and only moment that iron discipline ever wavered was in the presence of his daughter. Bellyanne, to Max, letting your own life hang on someone else's existence like that seemed like madness. He had no intention of building himself a weakness the way his teacher had. He had no idea, not yet, just how spectacularly that resolve was about to fall apart. In truth, Regis understood the anger simmering inside his student better than anyone, because he had once carried the very same fury. But there was one thing Max didn't know. If not for Bellyanne, Regis might have long since become a monster himself. Someday, he repeated, you'll meet the person who becomes your entire world. Meanwhile, Bellyanne had wrapped herself up like a mummy in her blankets. Rats bred at an alarming rate, even one or two needed to be dealt with immediately. Once Regis learned what had happened, he realized his daughter must have misunderstood their conversation. But there wasn't a single rat anywhere in the house. How could anyone possibly catch one? So he decided the only solution was to send his guards out to wherever rats actually lived. All this time, he'd been quietly scouting potential marriage prospects for his daughter, when word came that Ikai had sent her a letter. Just the thought of the man who'd once broken his precious girl's heart was enough to make Regis want to tear him limb from limb. And when he learned the letter contained disrespectful remarks about her, a dark aura seemed to gather around him. The moment the letter reached his hands, he burned it without a second thought. The rat was finally caught the next day, and Bellyanne's spirits bounced right back. She'd spent days hiding out in the garden, and could finally set foot back inside without fear. Lately, invitations had been pouring in. Among them, a birthday invitation from Earl Enlilu's estate. His youngest daughter, Ruth, was destined to become the princess's future companion, and one of the people who'd eventually try to bring down the wicked woman Bellyanne had once been. For now, though, their relationship was still perfectly civil, and Bellyanne figured this was the perfect chance to make a good impression. She had her maid gather flowers from the garden and prepare some lace and ribbons. Independence was all well and good, but a little effort toward cleaning up her reputation certainly wouldn't hurt. The moment Ruth received Bellyanne's reply, her eyes lit up. Lady Bellyanne's decorations are absolutely gorgeous. Just getting a reply at all had been more than she'd expected, and Bellyanne had even accepted her invitation. Ruth had always secretly admired Bellyanne, who looked like a porcelain doll come to life, though these days that admiration had faded into distant memory. Not long after, Bellyanne received Ruth's reply in turn, clumsily decorated in imitation of her own, and stretching across a full 10 pages. Lady Ruth really is quite endearing, Bellyanne thought. Around high society, gossip about Bellyanne never seemed to run dry, and Ikai, lurking in a corner, happened to overhear some of it. So she'd written back to every single person, except him, her own former boyfriend. Fine then, Earl Enlilu's estate, is it? Send word that I'll be attending the party. Belian, he thought coldly, you must be desperate for my attention. I'll make sure you regret this. Determined to survive this world, Belian resolved to turn over a new leaf, accepting the noble lady's invitations and carefully selecting gifts for each of them. But a father's love, it turned out, could be a heavy thing to bear. For a simple shopping trip, he assigned her a full 12 bodyguards. Living quietly was proving far harder than she'd hoped. She wandered into a rundown little shop, where a man sat slumped in the dim light, exhausted, and he tried to wave her off toward the far grander workshop next door. But Belian, angelic as ever, offered him a helping hand instead, and the man could only stare, dazzled by the sight of her. As for why she'd chosen him, it was simple. She believed in him. 6 months from now, at the princess's coming-of-age ceremony, a necklace of his making would set the entire social scene ablaze, turning him into the most celebrated craftsman of his generation. A true diamond in the rough. It was the first time anyone had ever truly believed in him. And he swore, right there, to give it everything he had. At the next shop, a pair of deep blue cufflinks stopped her in her tracks. Simple, elegant, exactly the sort of thing her father would suit perfectly. Just then, a slimy-looking man sauntered up. None other than Ikai's cousin. Belian, thoroughly repulsed by Ladian's leering manner, made an excuse about a prior engagement and slipped away. Ladian spotted the cufflinks still sitting on the counter and smirked to himself. She'd barely broken up with Ikai and already courting some other man. Well, now this ought to be entertaining. Meanwhile, a list of Belian's marriage prospects had been drawn up. And to everyone's surprise, the crown prince's name was on it. Regis crossed it off without a moment's hesitation. Just then a guard rushed in. His Majesty summons you to the palace at once. The emperor, twisting the rings on his right hand, remarked idly that a rat had gotten into the palace and ordered Regis to deal with it immediately, which really meant tracking down whoever was behind the assassination attempt and executing them on the spot. But the assassin they'd caught had left no evidence behind before taking his own life. Since this matter falls to you, the emperor said, I imagine you'll want to stay close by while you investigate. Pleased to see Regis fall in line so readily, the emperor's mouth curled into a satisfied smile. Truly, nothing puts my mind at ease like having Duke Fräulein by my side. With the assassin having left no trail whatsoever, Regis was looking at a long, drawn-out stakeout, and there was no reason to keep his own men tied up alongside him. Max, perched in a nearby tree, watched the whole exchange unfold. The emperor was nothing but a bug he could crush at any moment. So why was his teacher letting him get away with this? It was deeply disappointing, watching a man he respected so completely bend simply, because the emperor had found his one weakness to exploit. The moment word reached Regis that his daughter had enjoyed herself today, his entire demeanor shifted, softened. Is that what family does, Max thought? Turn something this small into a cause for so much worry? There had been a time he'd believed the two of them were cut from the same cloth, that anything standing in their way was simply meant to be destroyed. But the instant his teacher thought of his daughter, all that hardness melted away. And the emperor, who had always treated his own children as expendable tools, had seized on that very weakness. Max decided then that he needed to see for himself, to lay eyes on the person who could reduce his teacher to something so soft. Ladian, ever the schemer, sought out his cousin to tell him Belian had a new man. Ikai's face went dark instantly. Buying cufflinks for a man was an intimate gesture, one that between lovers practically meant you belonged to me. And the whole reason Ladian bothered telling him at all was simply to watch that exact expression cross his face. Even now, Ikai couldn't quite believe Belian had moved on to someone else. She'd clung to him so desperately once, sworn she'd love him forever, and here she was with a new man after only a few days. He couldn't accept it. He swore he'd make her pay for deceiving him like this. The girl slept with her window unlatched, and in the dead of night, a great gray wolf slipped in. Such a fragile little creature, so utterly defenseless, she probably wouldn't even get the chance to say her last words. He couldn't understand why his teacher cared so much about someone this weak. Killing her would take no effort at all. But the next moment, the girl woke up and calmly asked if he'd wandered into the wrong place. This was the Fräulein estate. Her composure caught him off guard. Shouldn't you be terrified right now? Max's eyes narrowed, a killing intent radiating off him. And what if I'm exactly where I meant to be? Is that so? Well then, you might want to reconsider. You'll regret it. I've got a whole year left before I die, you know? With that, Belian's face fell, and she struck a match. Max startled. This woman dared to light a flame with him standing right there? Bold. The glow of the match fell across Belian's face, so striking it was almost unfair, and something in the softest corner of his chest gave an unfamiliar twitch. This face looks familiar, he thought, stepping closer. Once she'd confirmed he was her father's student, Belian finally exhaled in relief, and a buried memory came rushing back. Wait, wasn't this the man from the weapons shop? Belian finally let her guard down. When she'd first woken, she'd seen a dark silhouette looming over her and thought, for one horrifying moment, that she was being sleep-paralyzed by a ghost. But the ache in her face told her this was no dream. Someone breaking in this late at night could only be a thief or an assassin. Had some old enemy finally come for her? Calm as she looked on the outside, she was already half scared to death. Then Max's voice rang out again, thoroughly rude in tone, and when she corrected him, he had the nerve to ask what right she had to lecture him. Wow, she thought, this guy has zero manners. Startled awake in the middle of the night, Belian felt genuinely wronged. If he weren't her father's student, she'd have decked him already. The commotion in the room quickly drew the guards, and just as she opened her mouth to respond, a blade pressed cold against her throat, her hand pinned in an iron grip. The calls outside grew more urgent, and the instant her eyes met Max's, she understood exactly what he wanted. Calmly, she called back that everything was fine. Once the guards had all left, Belian's expression darkened sharply. I've done what you wanted, so can you put the sword away now? She truly couldn't fathom why Max was so furious. She was the one who'd been broken in on after all. Drowsiness crept over her then, and she let out an involuntary yawn. Max looked instantly offended. Belian, sensing something was off, quickly clapped a hand over her mouth. And the next second, his furious voice thundered above her. What is that supposed to mean? Somewhat embarrassed, she muttered, It's your fault I can't even get to sleep. Just go home already. That single sentence stopped him cold, and he admitted flatly that he didn't have a home to go to. She'd already found something strange about him. Was this man really a mercenary? So you just wander from place to place, then? Max gave a heavy nod, and something in Belian's chest twisted painfully. So he really had nothing and no one. That was why he'd shown up here with nowhere else to go. Her sudden seriousness left Max inexplicably unsettled. But with her father away from home, she thought it over for a moment, then lifted her chin and looked him straight in the eye. If you have nowhere else to go, you can stay here for now. Without waiting for his answer, she huffed her way over with an armful of blankets and stuffed them into his arms on her tiptoes. You don't need to thank me. Just remember to repay the favor once you've made something of yourself. She said goodnight, and astonishingly actually fell asleep. What? What is she even doing, he thought, utterly bewildered. Because of this frail, delicate girl, his teacher remained under the Emperor's thumb, and to help free him from that leash, the Crown Prince had decided to kill his teacher's daughter. But her ethereal, otherworldly beauty left him momentarily spellbound. More unbelievable still, Belian showed him not the faintest trace of fear. She'd fallen fast asleep right in front of him. The sheer absurdity of it left him stunned. But the thought of his teacher steeled his resolve, and he reached out his hand toward her once more. If Belian died, his teacher could finally return to their original plan and bring down the Emperor together. But in that critical instant, the memory of her warm, friendly smile flooded back to him, and the assassination attempt died on the spot. Even a prince who'd killed without hesitation his whole life had a limit, apparently. Watching her sleep so peacefully, he found himself growing drowsy too, and it unsettled him deeply. Years of endless campaigns had trained him to survive on no sleep at all, never letting his guard down even at rest. But somehow in her presence, an unfamiliar sense of safety crept over him, his eyelids growing heavier and heavier, until at last he abandoned every lost defense and drifted off beside her. That night, Belian's sleep was far from peaceful. In her dream, she was chased by a massive dragon, fleeing all through the night, until, in the final desperate moment, her father descended like a god from the heavens and stood between her and the beast. She jolted awake. It was the first time she'd ever dreamed of a dragon, and she couldn't shake the feeling that today was going to be a lucky one. Then she rolled over and found a handsome face inches from her own. Wait, why is he asleep in my room? Belian scrambled backward in a panic. She thought about waking Max, but he looked so peaceful. She couldn't bring herself to do it. terrible manners aside. The man really was stunning, more handsome even than Akai. Then the thought of tomorrow's gossip column sent a chill down her spine. She needed to wake him up fast. But before her hand even reached him, he pulled her toward himself in his sleep. "What do you think you're doing?" The sudden bed press left Bilian frozen, until Max's glare snapped her back to her senses. "Well, look at you, plenty of energy for someone who just woke up." Max looked genuinely startled, and loudly insisted that was impossible. Bilian was speechless. She was about to teach him a lesson when something about his snarling, bristling expression struck her as oddly familiar, and she couldn't hold back her laughter any longer. It wasn't quite nothing. Actually, he looked exactly like a spiteful little black cat she'd known as a child, right down to that same haughty, sour expression to the very end. She didn't even want to keep laughing, but her body wouldn't cooperate, and her booming laughter drew a maid straight to the door. Max's presence absolutely could not be discovered, so Bilian fought to swallow her laughter, and stuffed him into the closet instead. "Hide in here and don't make a sound. You don't want people getting the wrong idea, do you?" "What idea?" "That you and I spent a rather scandalous night together." "Scandalous?" "Think of it the way animals do. It's mating." Max turned to stone on the spot, sputtering in outrage and demanding to know what she meant by that, only for his mouth to be clamped shut in the next instant. "Are you insane? Keep your voice down." But the maid outside had already heard the commotion and reached for the door handle, only to find it locked. With that settled between them, Bilian finally let go of his mouth. "If only you were always this obedient," she muttered, patting Kitten's forehead and, without a shred of concern for his feelings, slammed the closet door shut with a bang. That was close, my poor nose almost didn't survive that. Faced with an assassin who'd snuck in at midnight, the girl showed not a hint of fear, and instead generously offered him a place to stay the night. To avoid any unnecessary misunderstandings, Bilian hid him away in the closet. A young lady locking her own door was suspicious enough to raise eyebrows, and when the maid asked about it, Bilian's eyes darted evasively as she made up some excuse about being afraid someone might try to hurt her. That earned a hearty laugh from the maid. "My lady, this is the Fräulein estate. Even bandits are too scared to come near. You do love your jokes." Bilian forced out a dry laugh of her own. She could hardly say there was in fact someone dangerous right there in the room. That would take real nerve. Instead, she answered bitterly, "Who can say with father away right now?" "Ah, so my lady must be missing her father." The maid clasped her hand, eyes brimming with tears as she promised the master would return home safely. And it was only then that she noticed something odd. "Oh, my lady, your wrist is bruised." Meanwhile, Kitten had already been shut in the closet for 20 minutes. How much longer was he supposed to stay in here? This was no time to be wasting. So why hadn't that woman come back yet? Just then, the maid's voice rose sharply from outside, and he leaned toward the closet door to eavesdrop. "Melonly, a little lower. There? Ah." Max felt something clench inside him. What on earth is going on out there? Was this the thing Bilian had mentioned earlier? But he quickly dismissed the thought. His eyes narrowing with rising fury instead, that woman actually dared to toy with him. He was about to burst out of the closet when the maid's concerned voice drifted through again. "You really should get some pain medicine from the doctor." Since he hadn't laid a finger on Bilian, he naturally assumed she was putting on an act. "That must have really hurt. Look how bruised your wrist and shoulder are." "I just fell out of bed and hurt myself, that's all." Max felt a pang of guilt. That must have been from earlier, when he'd pulled her toward him in his sleep. Damn it, he thought, survival of the fittest is just how nature works, isn't it? That's only natural. After what felt like an eternity, Bilian finally stood in front of the closet, and the moment she opened the door, Max's eyes went wide at the sight of her. "You can come out now." She looked so striking he felt his face flush red, and to his surprise, she invited him to breakfast. Having never once shared a meal with anyone, he asked why without thinking. Because food just tastes better shared. No sooner had she said it than she took his hand. "Our head chef is excellent. You're in for a treat." Her sudden warmth sent his heart racing, an unfamiliar, disorienting feeling. To his dismay, breakfast turned out to be cucumber sandwiches, cucumbers being the one food he despised above all others. Faced with her thoughtful gesture, Max picked up the sandwich with trembling hands, and with the resolve of a man walking to his execution, forced it into his mouth. "So how is it?" She watched him closely as he chewed, slowly, painfully, before choking it down, and nodding mechanically, not entirely sure himself what he was doing. Watching her light up at how much he seemed to enjoy the sandwich, that same unfamiliar feeling washed over him again. And somehow, the cucumber didn't taste quite so awful after all. After the meal, Bellyanne was overcome with drowsiness, the book in her lap only making it worse. She glanced toward the sofa, where Max looked thoroughly comfortable, unaware, apparently, that he was lounging on her favorite spot to relax. Being watched so intently made it impossible for him to ignore her. "What are you looking at?" Just, you look like you're sleeping well." What he was actually thinking was, when is this guy planning to leave? Surely he's not waiting for my father to get home. All the girl had done was treat him to a meal, and not even one he liked, and somehow the man's heart wouldn't stop pounding. Under her expectant gaze, even the cucumbers he despised most had stopped tasting so bad. How exactly to give her father a gift? That question had been nagging at Bellyanne for days. The two of them barely spoke as it was, so suddenly presenting him with a present felt impossible to bring up. Her gaze landed on Max. If he was her father's student, surely he'd know what the man liked. Feeling her stare, Max shifted uncomfortably and told her to just spit out whatever she wanted to say. So what do you think about cufflinks as a gift?" Bellyanne's fidgeting, her flushed cheeks, her guilty, shifty posture. Every sign screamed danger. In one swift motion, Max snatched away the book she'd been hiding behind and leaned in, demanding to know who exactly this gift was for. "Who else would I be buying cufflinks for? You already know the answer." The two of them had never actually met before all this, but he'd heard plenty about how she'd once chased after Ikai. Unbelievable, this foolish woman was still hung up on that piece of trash. "Are you seriously planning to give a gift to someone like that?" Bellyanne's expression darkened instantly. "That's a bit much, don't you think?" Her genuine concern had been repaid with baseless, one-sided judgment, and bitterness rose in her chest. Chasing after someone that heartless? Do you even have any self-respect? At those words, the girl who'd looked so cold a moment ago clenched the fabric of her dress and began to tremble, forcing down the sting of hurt as she explained she wasn't chasing anyone. "I just want us to get along, that's all, since he happens to be his father." Silence fell over the room. After all that scolding, it turned out Max had gotten the wrong man entirely, and the next second he burst out laughing like a fool, leaving Bellyanne utterly bewildered. "Would you please stop laughing and just say something?" So you want to give him cufflinks as a gift?" "Yes, that's it, though they're a bit too flashy for a swordsman, honestly. Sounds like you're quite the expert at picking gifts." "I did give my own father a rather grand present recently, actually. He seemed a little bored lately, and thanks to me, he's finally found some happiness in his later years. I'm rather proud of it." "Oh, and what did you give him?" "That's not something you need to know. But whatever you give him, Duke Froilan is sure to love it." Bellyanne startled, wearing an expression that screamed as if before saying, "If it were really that simple, I wouldn't have needed to ask you at all." Max's head filled with question marks. Did she really not know how doted on she already was? Her father had been sacrificing for her sake this entire time, while she remained completely in the dark. It was almost too much. "Is this really what you want, teacher?" Regis, meanwhile, was taking a nap up in a tree, when he was suddenly woken by something praising his good looks. A rather bold little bird, apparently. He waved a hand to shoo it away, but the bird refused to budge. No, my daughter's afraid of small animals." Word soon reached the estate, and the moment he heard Bellyanne's name, the old duke appeared in front of the guard so fast it startled the poor man half to death. "Tell me at once what happened to Bellyanne." The guard quickly waved his hands to reassure him. Nothing was wrong. It was just that with the master away for so long, the young lady had grown anxious. Regis's mind conjured an image of his daughter missing him. She'd never once said such a thing before. This was the first time in her life. Seeing the duke's face light up with such joy, the guard continued. "There's also this. The young lady seems unwell, she won't leave her room, and looks rather depressed." Regis fell into deep, aching guilt. At this point, the little charade being staged for Max's sake had run its course. It was time to go see His Majesty the Emperor at once. For the very first gift the girl had ever given her father, she'd already ruined 100 sheets of stationery. Never having been close to him, she genuinely had no idea what to write. "Tell me, as his student, what does he usually talk about with you?" Max fell into thought. His teacher, as far as he knew, spent his days either praising Bellyanne or on his way to praise Bellyanne, a hopeless doting father through and through. But telling her the truth would ruin his teacher's plan, so his eyes darted evasively as he claimed they didn't talk much at all. This guy is completely useless, she thought. Better to rely on myself. An hour later, Belian finally produced a letter she was satisfied with a bizarre, jaw-dropping piece of writing. You're really going to send that? Of course, isn't this the perfect letter for admitting fault and asking forgiveness? I'll deliver it right now. She rushed off to send it, and Max, knowing full well she'd never listen to him anyway, could only mutter, well, I suppose I'll wish her luck. 4 full days had passed since the Emperor ordered Regis to uncover the mastermind behind the assassination attempt. And still there was no news whatsoever. The Emperor's teeth were practically grinding with rage. Regis, however, remained perfectly composed, calmly explaining that he hadn't yet found the source of the problem. The Emperor wasn't buying it and demanded he root out that filthy rat once and for all. That was the final straw for Regis. First Max had called his daughter a rat, and now it was his turn. What goes around, apparently, comes around. In truth, Regis had known all along that the chaos surrounding the assassination attempt was Max's own handiwork. No doubt hoping to provoke a conflict between his teacher and the Emperor, giving him an opening to break free of the Emperor's control. What Max didn't know was that Regis simply hadn't found the right moment yet, not that he had no intention of ever turning on the man at all. That murderous, otherworldly stare of his was enough to make even the high and mighty Emperor flinch. After Regis assured him the assassin threat had been neutralized, the Emperor, however reluctant, had no choice but to back down. Then stay a few more days, then I shall remain a while longer, Your Majesty. This brat is getting more insolent by the day, the Emperor thought, and it had been far too long since Regis had shown any reaction at all to the leash he held over him. So the Emperor decided it was time to fasten a new one, in the form of Crown Prince Max. Before he could dangle the throne in front of Max as bait, he first needed to find some way to keep Duke Froilan in check. Figuring her father would head straight to his study upon returning, Belian pushed open the door, intending to simply leave the gift there, and avoid the awkwardness of handing it over in person. But then she spotted the marriage prospect list lying open on the desk, and the gift in her arms slipped and scattered across the floor. Belian had clearly misread her father's intentions. The image of the Crown Prince's savage glare flashed through her mind. She couldn't believe it. Her father was actually planning to marry her off to that bloodthirsty prince, and he hadn't even mentioned it to her. Yes, she'd said she wanted to marry someone who excelled in wealth, reputation, family, looks, and ability, and yes, the Crown Prince technically checked every box. But he was also a merciless murderer, who'd wanted to torture her, of all people. So marrying into the royal family was father's real plan all along. But father, how could you do this to me? With Belian gone, Kitten had nothing to do but stare at the door, lost in thought until an unfamiliar presence drifted in through the window. A hand shot out, seizing the intruder hiding in the shadows by the throat, and he demanded, murderous intent radiating off him, to know what they wanted. The man flailed, gasping that he needed to let go. He wouldn't last much longer at this rate, but Max only tightened his grip further. Command sent me. They said you might be here. Your Highness? Only when the man looked seconds from passing out did Max finally release him. What business do you have with me? We've received word that the Emperor has been acting suspiciously of late. It seems, on the advice of his council, His Majesty wants you back at the palace as soon as possible. You may need to return quickly. Your Highness? The girl had gone off eagerly to deliver her gift, only to discover the marriage prospect list her father had drawn up for her, with the tyrannical Crown Prince's name circled unmistakably as the one he'd chosen. This was clearly the start of a royal marriage alliance. Her father hadn't said a single word to her about it, and had simply decided the course of her entire life without her consent. She refused to accept it, and she wasn't about to bend. She needed to change his mind before any formal courtship could even begin, and the first step was pretending she'd never seen the list at all. By the time she got back to her room, Kitten was already gone. Assuming he'd spotted a maid and gone into hiding, Belian launched into an extended search for him, but came up empty-handed in the end. Her eyes caught a note left on the tea table, from Kitten himself. He'd written that she needn't look for him. He'd come back eventually, in handwriting so crooked even a cat could have written it better. The next moment, a faint blush crept across her face. It's not like anyone told him to come back anyway, she thought. Looking around the room, quiet once more, an unexpected pang of loneliness settled over her. The least he could have done was say goodbye before leaving. By now, Kitten had reached the outskirts of the city, uncertain whether that woman had even seen the note he'd left. He'd never imagined he'd be the type to leave something like that behind. If no one had ever come looking for him, he thought, he probably would have just gone on living out there, taking it as a matter of course. He came to a stop at an open stretch of ground, one that happened to offer a clear view of the entire Fräulein estate. Urged on by his subordinate, Max swung his rope and took the shortcut back. Belian woke the next day to find herself sprawled on the floor, still grumbling to herself about how unreliable her father's student was, letting the sun climb halfway up the sky without even bothering to wake her. Then she spotted the note on the floor, and remembered he'd already left. I wonder if he's found somewhere to stay, she thought, and it startled her that she still had the energy to worry about someone else. What mattered most right now was sorting out her own mess. She glanced at the items on her desk, thought about how her father might misunderstand things, and remembered that yesterday's marriage list had made her forget the real task entirely. This is so hard, she sighed. Ever since Kitten had shown up, Belian had barely left her room, and now that he was gone, she spent her days staring blankly out the window. Her maids, worried about her strange mood, suggested she go out for a walk while the weather held. Perhaps cooped up too long? Belian agreed at once, thinking all the while that she needed to settle both the marriage matter and the pendant issue before her father returned. Just then, her father's voice reached her ears, and though he was supposed to be at the palace, there he was, appearing without warning right in front of her. Belian froze, stammering and fumbling in surprise. What he said next left her utterly stunned. Belian, I won't leave you alone anymore. It was the first time he'd ever said something so sentimental, and a faint tomato red crept over his stern face. What should have been a touching moment left Belian panicking instead. She had no idea what had prompted such a sudden declaration. Had something happened to him? Belian, have you had dinner yet? No, not yet. Even alone, you need to eat on schedule. Skip meals often enough and you'll faint again. To Belian, his concern took on an entirely different meaning. He probably just doesn't want me fainting before I can marry the crown prince, she thought bitterly. I'm nothing more to him than a bargaining chip for a political match. You are not allowed to faint again. His darkened expression sent a shiver down her spine. The next moment, he stepped closer and took her hand. The first time he'd ever done so. But what was she supposed to do? This very hand would eventually be the one sending her off to prison. The old Belian, the foolish girl who'd once hoped desperately for her father's love, was already dead. None of this meant anything to her anymore. Despite her young age, the girl's wicked reputation had spread far and wide, and most people kept their distance. But as a duke's daughter, she still received plenty of invitations to be someone's dance partner, from a royal knight famed for his swordsmanship and grace, to a handsome silver-tongued earl's son, even the current head of the foreign ministry. Having once worried she'd have no partner at all, she now found herself agonizing over which to choose, and finally settled on the handsome Earl Loa's son. As the maid carried her reply out of the room, she nearly jumped out of her skin at the sight of Duke Fräulein waiting just outside the door. The moment he learned his daughter had chosen her dance partner, he vanished into the night in a flash. The scene shifts. Regis had already stormed into the Lowe estate, and the Earl's son was trembling from head to toe, having no idea why the Duke would come calling this late at night. He stammered out a question, only to be met with an ice-cold, furious glare, and Lowe nearly wet himself on the spot. Regis looked him up and down, then removed his glasses and said coldly, Edwin Angelo Lowe, you don't meet the standard. The very next day, Lowe paid a visit to the Fräulein estate, arriving in the reception room where only he and Belian were present. Under Belian's stunned gaze, he dropped to his knees with a thud and stammered out, I've heard Belian already has a dance partner, so I've agreed to accompany another lady instead. Also, word has spread that Belian is currently deeply in love with a certain gentleman. Belian, the unwitting star of this rumor, froze completely. She'd never imagined such a ridiculous rumor could spread. Had someone seen Kitten climbing in and out through her window? Whoever started this rumor, she was going to make them pay dearly once she found them. Belian's display of grace and understanding won Lowe over completely. Not meeting the standard this time doesn't mean I could never court you in the future. He produced a rose from seemingly nowhere and invited her to dinner. Just then, a wave of killing intent swept over the room. Duke Fräulein, watching from the shadows. A single glare was enough to send Lowe fleeing in absolute terror. This terrifying place, he swore he would never set foot in again. Meanwhile, Kitten had found himself at a tea party, A gathering that might as well have been a village intelligence network for all the gossip flying around. And the topics the noble women discussed left him inexplicably irritated. Everyone was curious who Lady Froilan would bring as her escort. And who has that troublemaker Lord Ikai chosen? I hear he has someone he's seeing now, though no one knows who. Could it be someone too embarrassing to show in public? Just then, someone knocked over a wine glass, and the room, which had been buzzing a moment ago, fell into a terrified silence. Do you enjoy gossiping behind people's backs? Have any of you actually seen this with your own eyes? Would you dare say any of this to Lady Froilan's face? 3 sharp questions in a row left the gossiping ladies with nothing to say in their defense. He tracked down Fleur, the hostess of the gathering, who, to his surprise, already knew his true identity as Crown Prince. This, it turned out, was where they gathered their intelligence. On learning that Lowe had actually dared to reject Belian as his dance partner, Max's temper flared, veins bulging with fury. Who does that man think he is, rejecting a duke's daughter? As for the rumor that Lady Froilan was secretly meeting a mysterious man every night, that had come straight from Viscount Delroll's son, none other than Ladian, Ikai's own cousin. And Ikai, who'd simply let his cousin slander his ex-girlfriend without a word of protest, wasn't going to get off easy either. Within a day, I want everything on both of them, along with the full details on everyone who's applied to be Belian's dance partner. But it turned out Duke Froilan had already bought up every scrap of that information first. Before Fleur could even get the words out, Max had already vanished. After Lowe left, Regis remained fixated on the matter of his daughter's dance partner and rode off in his carriage to look into it further. Kitten, uneasy about the whole situation himself, slipped into Belian's room the moment his teacher was gone, only to run straight into her as she walked in. The very crown prince who'd once wanted her dead had snuck into her room the instant he learned she was searching for an escort, some inexplicable pull drawing him back. And now she'd caught him red-handed. So he actually meant it when he said he'd come back. Did you get kicked out again? Belian already had more than enough on her plate, and now this cat had shown up out of nowhere to add to it. Seeing how troubled Belian looked, Kitten fixed her with a serious expression and told her to just say it. First, promise you won't tell my father. All right, I promise. Swear it. If you leak this, I'll fine you 100 gold bars. Fine, even if I let something slip by accident, I'll hand over my entire fortune to you. His earnestness was genuinely endearing. A man without even a home to his name, promising to hand over an entire fortune. Careful, she might actually take him up on it. That handsome smile of hers left Kitten's face flushing tomato red. One more second of this and his heart might just give out. There have been some ugly rumors going around about me lately. Something about Lady Froilan carrying on a secret romance with some unidentified man. Not that a secret romance would be anything to be ashamed of, but since I never actually did it, I've got nothing to hide either. The problem is, that rumor's probably why everyone who wanted to be my dance partner has run for the hills. Max's expression darkened at once, furious that anyone could believe such nonsense so easily. If it had been him, he'd have believed her without a shred of doubt. And then, in the very next instant, he felt ashamed of himself for even entertaining the thought. Honestly, that's the small problem. The real issue is my father wants me married off, and he's already picked someone out. He never imagined his own teacher would use his daughter as a political pawn. That whole loving father act had apparently been just that, an act. Belian was determined to show up to the ball with a partner already, or her father would drag her straight into a formal courtship. Guess I'll just have to trouble Geraldine again for this one. As clear as she'd made everything sound, Belian still had no idea how Kitten actually felt, and chose her own guard and cousin instead. A relative meant no one would gossip, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Hearing it was a relative, Kitten's tense nerves finally eased. Thank you for listening to my worries. Belian smiled, and with his heart racing dangerously, he decided he'd better not stick around here any longer. He'd barely taken 2 steps before she called him back and tossed him an absurdly adorable little pouch, stuffed full of gold coins. To make sure he'd actually accept it, she added cheerfully, "It's not a handout, you just have to come help me again next time I need it, like today." I don't know what to say, actually. What he actually meant was, he was simply worried about Kitten sleeping on the streets without a coin to his name. If you ever have nowhere else to go, this place is always open to you, understood? Kitten pressed his lips together, saying nothing, and gave a bashful nod. On the outskirts of the city, the head of the foreign ministry was on his way to the Froilan estate. when his horse suddenly bolted, nearly throwing him from his seat. He was still snapping at his driver for the poor handling, when a cold voice cut through the air. "You must be Ronald Herman Croix. If you're headed to my estate, don't bother. So you're saying I'm not good enough for your daughter, and you've come all this way just to warn me off? If you understand that much, then turn around and go home." Just 10 minutes earlier, another hopeful, Paul Miller, had been sent packing the same way. All 3 men he'd turned away that day had come straight off the marriage prospect list, and not one of them had satisfied him. It looked like he'd have to have Daly draw up the whole list from scratch. All because of a single pair of men's cufflinks. Malicious rumors had spread that the Duke's daughter was keeping some secret man on the side, and the only person who could have known exactly what those cufflinks looked like was Lady Anne, who'd been there at the shop that day. But if she could just get her father to wear them, the rumor would fall apart on its own. The design, after all, was one of a kind. So Bellian arranged to meet her father, first handing back the pendant he'd left behind earlier. He accepted it with his usual cool detachment, and then she moved on to the real matter at hand. The instant he laid eyes on the elegant cufflinks, the old Duke's eyes lit up. This was the first gift his daughter had ever given him. Bellian watched him carefully, trying to gauge his reaction, but he stayed silent for what felt like forever. Just as she was convinced her whole plan had fallen apart, he not only accepted the gift with obvious delight, but clutched it to his chest as though it were something precious, and even offered to accompany her to the birthday party. That was well beyond anything she'd planned for, and with him looking so genuinely eager, she couldn't bring herself to say no. The day of Earl and Lilu's daughter's birthday party arrived quickly, and Fleur looked utterly done with life, dragged into working overtime on her day off by the Crown Prince himself, tasked with smoothing things over for Bellian. Sure enough, before Bellian had even arrived, the gossip was already flying. But for Fleur, armed with all the inside information she needed, diffusing it took no more than a few well-placed words. As for the mysterious secret lover everyone kept whispering about, well, just find whoever's wearing that particular pair of cufflinks. Ikai had shown up to the party too, and everyone was already anticipating a dramatic reunion between the once famous couple on the dance floor. And if Sir Ikai should happen to run into the man wearing those cufflinks, honestly, it was a shame these women weren't writing novels for a living. Every word of it reached Ikai's ears, and he decided he'd see for himself exactly who Bellian showed up with. The unwitting star of the whole scandal was already on her way, and her father had promised to stay by her side for the entire day. The moment the two of them arrived, they became the center of attention. "Everyone, please quiet down," announcing the arrival of the Empire's hero, Duke Regis Froilan, and his daughter, Lady Bellian Froilan. The famous Duke Froilan, gracing a mere earl's daughter's birthday party. And he's every bit as striking as the rumors say. The flattery poured in without pause, but Regis had eyes for no one but his precious daughter. He drew her close against him and gently reminded her to watch her step. The mystery of the cufflinks finally came to light, and the crowd froze in collective shock. They'd been a gift for her father all along. Still, a few troublemakers couldn't resist a jab. As her father, the Duke surely arrived prepared just to quiet the rumors. Regis's expression turned murderous at that, and a single glare was enough to silence the gossips instantly. How dare they cheapen a gift from his own daughter like that? When Ikai, sly as ever, learned the cufflinks had gone to the Duke, he smirked to himself in the corner. That's more like it. Of course, there's no other man in Bellian's life. There's no way she could ever forget me so easily. The Duke's presence alone lent the Enlilou estate an air of prestige, and the Countess herself, with her daughter in tow, came over to pay their respects. Ruth finally got to meet the woman she so admired, and rushed forward to thank Bellian for coming. She'd wanted so badly to meet her, and honestly, who could resist a girl as sweet as Ruth? Bellian squeezed her hand back, and presented a carefully chosen gift. Everyone leaned in, curious, and inside the little metal case sat a pressed powder compact with a small built-in mirror. When Ruth bowed her head, Bellian worried for a moment she didn't like it. But the next second, Ruth burst into tears of pure joy. This is a completely revolutionary gift. With a compact like this, a woman could touch up her makeup without a maid's help at all. After the party, word of Bellian's recommendation spread, and the compact became an instant sensation, with every lady in attendance eager to get her hands on one. "Would you tell me which workshop made this?" Everyone braced themselves, Certain Belian would refuse to say, and then, to their surprise, she answered readily. Fidel's workshop. He's young, but his craftsmanship is something you can truly trust. In high society, no one ever shared their workshop connections. That kind of information was too valuable. Breaking with tradition like that made Belian seem almost angelic in their eyes. The girl was crying, and the man panicked. Why are you crying? Belian froze at Kitten's sudden appearance. What is my father's student doing here? I don't know what happened, he said, but don't cry. Just tell me who hurt you. In truth, she'd only been tearing up from a stray yawn. But she had no intention of explaining that to him. So if someone hurt me, you'd go teach them a lesson? That's right, didn't I promise I'd help you? Touched as she was by how much he cared, a commoner speaking out of turn, or worse, striking a noble, was punishable by death. And she wasn't about to let Kitten throw his life away over something like that. If you really want to help me, start by fixing the way you talk, especially in front of others. Watch your tone and don't be so reckless with your words. Kitten's head filled with question marks. How you speak depends entirely on the situation. Choose your words well, and they can open doors for you. Choose poorly and you'll make enemies before you know it. Nobles are especially sensitive about this sort of thing. Things might be different if the class system were ever abolished, but for now, mind who's watching and listening. And only once you show me respect will others follow your lead. Understand? Kitten broke into a cold sweat, then answered with a stubborn little huff. Got it. By the way, why are you even here at this party? I had some business. Actually, honestly, I just wanted to see you. Belian told him that her father was serving as her escort today. And precisely because of that, not a single soul had dared ask her to dance. Just then, the music began, and Kitten extended a hand toward her. What are you doing with your hand out? Isn't it obvious? I'm asking you to dance. Consider yourself honored, then. I don't dance with just anyone. With Kitten's handsome face this close, she couldn't help but admit he really was stunningly good-looking. She'd assumed a commoner like him would be a clumsy dancer at best, but to her surprise, he moved beautifully. What is going on here? She wondered, distracted enough to stumble mid-step, and Kitten caught her steady without missing a beat. Careful, what were you thinking about? Only then did they both realize how close they'd drifted, and their faces flushed a matching shade of crimson. Just as they drew even closer, the sharp crack of shattering glass rang out at exactly the wrong moment, and the two of them jumped apart instantly, turning to find Regis radiating pure murderous intent. What exactly do you think you're doing? He'd wanted a peaceful day with his daughter, but it seemed there was always someone reckless enough to hover around her. Regis had noticed when Belian stepped out onto the terrace, but had assumed it was nothing worth worrying about. That was when the ex-boyfriend materialized out of nowhere. Surely Belian heading somewhere private was a hint for him to follow, wasn't it? But the very next moment, he froze in place. Duke Froilan had appeared, blocking his path, radiating pure killing intent. The sudden, jarring shift in the man's demeanor stopped Ikai cold. He didn't dare take another step forward. Was this because he'd broken up with the man's daughter? Under the crushing weight of Regis's presence, the pathetic Ikai had no choice but to slink away in defeat. Was he really the type to cling on like this? No sooner had one problem settled than another arose. He glanced over to find his daughter dancing with a man. He assumed it was some friend of hers, someone impressive enough to have slipped past his notice. Whichever family he belonged to, he could always look into it later. But then his daughter let out a scream, and Regis panicked, flashing over to the terrace just in time to catch the scene. His carefully guarded treasure had very nearly been snatched up by some pig of a suitor. The old duke was practically shaking with rage, and furiously warned his student to keep his distance from his daughter. Having known Max longer than anyone, Regis understood exactly how unruly the boy could be. If the late Empress hadn't entrusted her son's future into his hands, he'd have killed any man bold enough to eye his daughter without a second thought. Baffled by the whole scene, the two of them wisely put some distance between themselves. Belian, meanwhile, was far more concerned about the cut on her father's hand, and at the sight of her worried little face, Regis's stern expression softened considerably. Did father come looking for me because he couldn't find me at the party? Belian stared at the mess of wine and blood on her hands, unsure where to even begin, and Regis simply took her hand himself. Then someone caught her other hand. Her foot had been injured too. In the next instant, Max's hand was slapped away hard, and Regis moved with startling speed to shield his daughter behind him. My daughter needs no one else's concern. The sudden Princess Carrie left Belian blushing furiously, and before leaving, her father made sure to warn Max never to set foot in his estate again. In that moment, Belian had no choice but to go along with her father. She couldn't afford to make him angrier. Thinking back on what he'd just said to her, something in the softest part of her chest gave an unexpected tug. Could she really allow herself to hope for something from him? But she knew exactly how this story was supposed to end. This wasn't the time to dwell on that, though there was a far more urgent problem right in front of her. Father, you're not seriously going to carry me out of the ballroom like this, are you? Amid the murmurs rippling through the crowd from every direction, Belian begged her father to put her down, but he wouldn't hear of it. To him, his daughter's well-being came before anything else, and so Belian found herself living through the single most mortifying moment of her entire life. Once the father and daughter had left, the whispers around the room grew bolder than ever. Goodness, isn't that embarrassing, making a scene at someone else's party like that? Doing that on purpose? Surely she just wants attention. Knowing that lady, I really wouldn't put it past her. Then a voice rang out, full of righteous indignation. Seems like everyone's forgotten Lady Fräulein has never been in good health. It was Ruth, the party's host, and she carefully explained to everyone exactly why Belian had left the way she had, leaving the gossiping ladies visibly embarrassed. Now that you mention it, Lady Fräulein has seemed rather frail lately, hasn't she? I heard she's even fainted a few times before. Ikai, lurking in the corner as usual, caught every word of it, and it struck him for the first time that he might have misjudged Belian all along. He remembered how she used to struggle to keep pace with him, how he'd assumed it was all an act to get his attention, but now it seemed she really had been unwell the whole time. Amid the swirl of gossip around him, an unfamiliar ache settled in his chest. Back at the Fräulein estate, Belian had been ordered to rest in bed, her father's hand gently resting on her forehead, as he told her to call for him the instant she felt unwell. Even after he left the room, none of it felt quite real to her. He'd treated her like she didn't exist for years, and now, out of nowhere, he was being inexplicably kind. But what could he possibly gain from being kind to her now, besides making sure she was healthy enough for her marriage to the crown prince? She'd once believed that breaking up with Ikai would be enough to escape her tragic fate, but now her father had simply swapped Ikai for the crown prince instead, out of one death trap and straight into another. Belian refused to accept that her life would end this way. Sorry, father, I'm not marrying him. Just watch me. Elsewhere, Kitten sat with his chin in his hand, lost in thought. Ever since seeing Belian at the party, her face and her laugh had taken over every corner of his mind. If only they'd been standing just a little closer. He immediately felt ashamed of the thought, and shook his head hard as if that alone could banish it. But the feeling had lingered ever since he'd gotten back. Fleur had never once seen her lord act quite so strange. Before long, the trouble spilled over onto everyone around him. Fleur, send out an invitation in my name. I need you to arrange a chance for me to see her. See who? Belian. It wasn't that Fleur wasn't willing. It was that securing an audience with Lady Fräulein these days had become genuinely difficult. What do you mean? She's the most sought-after woman in the Empire right now. With her father away from home, Kitten ignored his teacher's warning entirely and knocked on Belian's window, and the next instant she flung herself straight into his arms. Why don't we date? The sudden confession sent him swallowing hard enough to choke. A full week had passed since he'd last seen her, waiting patiently for his teacher to leave the house before he dared come by. But dating Belian, actually dating her, was something he'd never even let himself imagine. So that explains it, he thought. All that kindness she'd shown him before, it was because she liked him. Well, if this was what Belian wanted, then he'd give it to her. Feels a bit fast, maybe, but one son and one daughter should be plenty after the wedding. Twins would be even more adorable. Just then, Belian's voice sounded from behind him. Before you get the wrong idea, let me clarify. What I'm proposing is a contract relationship. Kitten's smile vanished instantly. Belian watched him carefully out of the corner of her eye. In terms of looks alone, he was exactly her type. And as her father's cherished student, no one could play this role better than him. If he'd just cooperate, that would be ideal. But judging by his expression, he wasn't about to agree so easily. I'll pay whatever you want, just say yes to this arrangement. If anything, that only seemed to make him angrier. Don't worry, this has an expiration date. It only needs to last until I can talk my way into moving out on my own. That got Kitten's full attention. Wouldn't leaving be difficult? Why would you even want to? Remember what I told you before about seeing that marriage list on my father's desk? The problem is he's already picked out my match. And given who I am, I have absolutely no way to refuse him. Who is it? Someone even you can't say no to? Seeing how genuinely curious he looked, and after making him swear to keep it secret, Belian slowly said the name, Maxashit. What? Him? He was about to continue when it suddenly hit him. Wasn't that the Empire's crown prince? Wasn't that him? Are you really supposed to court the crown prince? Yeah, isn't it ridiculous? There's just no way that could ever happen. In truth, it wasn't strange at all. As the daughter of House Froilan, Belian's standing ranked second in the entire empire, and marrying her father's family into royalty would bring no shortage of benefits. But when it came to courting a royal family with real power and the people's devotion behind it, even a duke's daughter couldn't be the one to refuse first. The consequences of that would be more than she could bear. So before her father could push her into a formal courtship, she needed to find herself a boyfriend, and fast. If his own daughter got caught up in a scandal with another man, there was no way he could still push her toward the crown prince. I had no idea you hated the crown prince this much. What if he doesn't mind, though? What if he actually likes girls like you? The image of the crown prince proposing to her flashed through Belian's mind, and it was such a horrifying picture she couldn't bear to look at it. Wouldn't that be a good thing for you, then? The crown prince is heir to the throne. He could give you anything you wanted. Kitten said it with total seriousness, which sent Belian spiraling into thought all over again. But she landed right back on the same conclusion. Run. Who in their right mind would want to marry that sadistic tyrant? I'd rather stay single my whole life. Those words hit Kitten harder than he could handle, and unsure whether he could survive whatever came next. He fled the scene like he was running for his life. The least she could do was give a straight answer, he thought bitterly. Yes or no, either one. A loud crash startled Fleur half out of her wits. I didn't expect you back so soon, my lord. He looked to be in a foul mood, and she tentatively asked whether things had gone well, only to be answered with a withering glare. What does it mean when a woman runs from her intended match? Don't tell me you're actually asking. Is there any answer other than she absolutely despises the man on paper? And so Kitten took yet another crushing blow. The girl he liked was destined to be matched with him. And yet, instead of joy, all he felt was a deep, sinking despair, all because she had no idea who he really was. The crown prince, cruel and merciless by reputation, was someone she'd rather stay single forever than marry into. Max was too heartbroken to even speak, and here he'd already picked out how many children they'd have together. Fleur had assumed he'd been the one turned down, but to her astonishment, it was Belian who'd made the proposal, and her inner gossip flared to life instantly. Max, predictably, told her nothing, and pivoted instead to asking about the Emperor's recent movements. His Majesty was still pressing him to return to the palace, and the Empress had sent yet another round of assassins, all of whom had already been captured and were awaiting his judgment. The current Empress, Elizabeth Ras Achet, was his stepmother, the one who'd spent his whole life trying to end it. And the very woman who'd secretly poisoned his birth mother was clearly stirring again. Max was seriously considering sending the assassin's severed heads to her as a gift, when Belian's words about never wanting to marry a sadistic tyrant surfaced in his mind. After weighing it a moment, he decided to leave them alive, for now. Fleur, who'd served him for years, was thoroughly stunned. This simply wasn't like Max at all. But his next question left her brain short-circuiting entirely. Has anyone proposed a courtship for me lately? No. If anyone had, I would have told you right away. What's gotten into you? Max's expression darkened at that. And without another word, he threw on his cloak and walked out. Meanwhile, back at the Froilan estate, Belian was sharing a rare, quiet dinner with her father, awkward as ever. She regretted deeply not making more of an effort to keep Kitten from leaving earlier. Then her father's voice broke the silence, and she prayed with everything she had that he wouldn't bring up the courtship. Of course, that was exactly what happened. What do you think of the crown prince? The scene he'd witnessed at the birthday party still haunted him, and Belian, with no idea that Kitten and the crown prince were one and the same, scrambled to change the subject. I haven't really thought about it, honestly. I don't know much about him. Speaking of the crown prince, though, I've actually been reading up on the founding history lately, The first emperor's story is fascinating, especially all the records of the handcrafted items he made. Regis froze at that. Composed as he always was, panic flickered across his face, and he grabbed his coat, mumbling some excuse about urgent business, and left the table early. It was an expression Belian had never once seen on him before, and he never left so abruptly under normal circumstances. Regis practically fled outside, looking even paler than before. He'd never imagined Belian would be reading up on the royal family. The history books surely wouldn't reveal everything, but if even a single detail slipped through and she caught on to something, it would spell disaster. But why, of all times, was Belian suddenly interested in the royal family? Did it have something to do with meeting Max? Even someone as naive as Belian surely couldn't be ignorant of all the dark rumors surrounding the crown prince. And if she still chose to accept him regardless, what then? Just then, Belian found him. She'd noticed her father's expression darken earlier and, worried she might have done something wrong again, had chased after him. She stole a glance at him only to find him looking, oddly, rather pleased, and he even draped his own coat over her shoulders. It's not a bad thing, learning more about the crown prince. Her father had brought him up again, and Belian's heart plummeted straight into ice. So he really did want her to marry the crown prince. But she wasn't about to fold, even as she nodded along with a bright smile and promised she would. Belian, for your own happiness, I will never let that boy anywhere near you. I've made up my mind. I need to bring up the contract relationship with him again. Two hearts saying one thing and meaning another. When would these two finally clear up their misunderstanding? Only time would tell. Desperate to see his ex-girlfriend again, the scoundrel exploited another girl's admiration for him to secure himself an invitation to the tea party. Finally, I get to see you again, Belian. Just the night before, Belian had received another letter from Ruth, this one with a tea party invitation attached. She figured it would be the perfect chance to quietly gather information about the crown prince through the social circuit. What he hated most, that sort of thing. So the very next day, Ruth received Belian's reply accepting the invitation. This particular gathering, though, was set to be held at Vero's house, and they'd need her approval first. What none of them realized was that Vero had long harbored feelings for Ikai, Belian's ex. Reluctant as she felt, seeing how eager everyone else looked, Vero eventually agreed. After the gathering broke up, Vero sought Ikai out to complain about Ruth's presumptuous scheme, and when he barely acknowledged her, she felt even more wounded. That woman, the one coming, that's Lady Fräulein. The words had slipped out before she could stop them, and Ikai's hand froze mid-polish on his sword. Lady Fräulein is coming to your tea party? Yes, honestly, I don't know how it ended up this way. Ikai suddenly closed the distance between them, brushing a lock of hair back from her face. Lady Vero, then would you invite me too? If Lady Fräulein's going to be there, I really can't just sit back and not worry about you. At those words, I can't just sit back and not worry about you, Vero seemed to lose all capacity for rational thought, and blushing furiously, agreed to his request. What she didn't realize was that the only reason he wanted to go at all was to see his ex-girlfriend Belian again. The scene shifts to the marketplace, where Belian had come to pick out an outfit suitable for the tea party, her father having, as always, dispatched a small army of guards to trail her. Every shop seemed to carry the exact same style, some trend sweeping the season, and while pretty enough, none of it suited her. Just as she was starting to despair, a crisp, clear voice spoke up beside her. If I were you, I definitely wouldn't wear anything like that. It was her first time meeting Fleur, and something about her easy warmth put Belian instantly at ease. That style seems a bit too revealing for you, honestly. Trendy or not, there's no reason to wear something uncomfortable or unflattering. And it certainly doesn't suit your elegant sensibility at all. Thanks to Fleur's advice, Belian finally made up her mind. And Fleur, for her part, finally understood exactly why her lord had fallen for this woman. Up close, she was even more beautiful than she'd realized. In the end, Belian had the dress custom-made exactly the way she wanted it, and turned to head home. A commotion erupted up ahead. Who do you think you are, harming a noble and then refusing to apologize? Apologize right now. Through the crowd, Belian spotted the widely disliked Baron Gordon at the center of it. You tripped over your own 2 feet, why exactly would I apologize? That tone, arrogant and utterly dismissive, could only belong to one person, her father's student. What was he doing here? Baron Gordon shook with fury at Kitten's words. You low-born wretch, how dare you talk back to a noble? What are you all standing around for? Seize this insolent commoner at once. While Kitten was still weighing exactly how to deal with this greasy little man, Belian appeared out of nowhere and planted herself between them. Gordon recognized Belian at a single glance and instantly dropped into a groveling bow. Imagine that. Even the hero's daughter recognizes me. A sly grin spread across his face. If he played his cards right today, there might be something in it for him. But his warm reception met a cold wall instead. Belian's tone was icy as she declared that his behavior had left her thoroughly displeased. Have I done something wrong, my lady? In truth, Belian had always despised this exact breed of sycophant, and today she intended to give him a taste of his own medicine. In the name of the Empire's hero, my father, Regis Froilan, I command you to stop threatening and intimidating my man. She lied that Kitten was hers. His heart pounding after his sudden rescue, Kitten cupped her hand in front of everyone watching. Thank you for saving me, my lady. It was a bit of a mess, but I'm glad it brought us together like this. Actually, there's something I've been wanting to say to you. Let's do the contract relationship. Belian's hand shot up to cover his mouth instantly. How could he blurt out something that important in the middle of a public square? To everyone watching, their gestures looked positively intimate, sparking a flurry of speculation about the two of them. And in the next instant, Belian had dragged him bodily into her carriage. Can I ask what changed your mind? In truth, nothing had. The reason Kitten hadn't answered right away was simply that the sadistic tyrant Belian despised so much was him. This clearly wasn't the moment to reveal the truth. As for why he'd shown up at the marketplace at all, word had reached him that Ikai would also be attending the tea party Belian was set to go to in a few days. No one knew exactly why Ikai wanted to be there. But wasn't engineering a reunion with an ex usually a sign of lingering feelings? The moment that connection clicked into place, Max couldn't sit still. And after some quiet digging, he'd tracked her down here. The only way to head Ikai off before he could try anything at the tea party was to become Belian's official partner through the contract relationship and attend right alongside her. He'd make that man think twice about ever trying again. But before that, I've got a question of my own. Why did you propose this contract to me in the first place? The moment the words left her mouth, Kitten's fist clenched nervously. Well, you don't have a home or any money, but you are a student my father approved of. Max's eyes went wide in disbelief. So once again, he'd been reading far too much into things. And if I need another reason, you're the only man I know that I could actually trust with something like this. That single sentence flipped his mood entirely, the corner of his mouth curling upward before he could stop it. That reason alone was more than enough. His striking expression left Belian momentarily dazed all over again. Terrible personality aside, Max really was exactly her type when it came to looks. All right, let's talk terms then. How much compensation do you want? They say money ruins everything, and Max's rising smile vanished instantly. He turned away and insisted he didn't need any payment. Call it making up for hurting her before. Belian was practically overwhelmed with gratitude at that, squeezing his hand and calling him nothing short of an angel. In return, you can stay and eat here anytime you like, and if you ever need anything else, just say so. Right, understood. Now can you let go of my hand? Instead of letting go, Belian only gripped tighter. We're a couple now, no need to be so formal about it. After all, this whole unfunny little charade was quite literally a matter of life and death for her. Now that you've agreed to the contract, from now on we'll be arm in arm, and when you say my name, I want you to say it gently, understand? He was about to introduce himself, only to find she already knew his name. Yet she kept calling him "Hey you" anyway, which irritated him more than he cared to admit. She'd actually learned Max's name by eavesdropping on his conversation with her father, and it hadn't taken her long to notice it sounded suspiciously like Max in her old world's language. She really was satisfied with every last detail about him. Sounds like your parents named you hoping you'd grow into someone remarkable. Kitten simply nodded along, but her next words left him strangely unsettled. So, let's get started drafting the contract. He didn't think there was any need to write one at all. He had no intention of gaining anything from this arrangement. Belian gave him a look of pure, baffled concern. Apparently her father hadn't bothered teaching his student even the basics. Listen carefully. Every contract needs a written agreement. If our terms are never put down in writing, what's to stop me from taking advantage of you however I please, or pinning every wrongdoing on you? But Kitten answered without a moment's hesitation. You would never do that. Never in her wildest dreams. Had the universally reviled villainess expected someone to trust her unconditionally? And the feeling was as strange as it was wonderful. She was the wicked woman everyone despised. And after years of wearing that reputation, she'd come to accept the scorn as simply her due. Every misdeed blamed on her whether she'd done it or not, and no one had believed a word she said even as death closed in. And yet here was this one person, willing to trust her without conditions, without proof, without hesitation. It felt like warm sunlight on a winter's day. But fair's fair, she thought. How could Kitten be so naive about the world? Fraud always targets people close to you. Even someone you trust with your whole heart shouldn't be trusted blindly. That's exactly why you need a written contract. Looks like she'd have to teach him a thing or two during this fake relationship of theirs. Then, as if struck by sudden inspiration, Belian grabbed the collar of his shirt and pulled him closer. Before we sign the contract, we should get our story straight first. That completely short-circuited him. Get closer, this part matters. He wasn't even remotely prepared for this. Wasn't this moving a little fast? But then again, he thought practice really was important. Kitten leaned in toward her, ready to deliver his very first kiss, when the carriage jolted hard over a stone in the road. Belian glanced around nervously, and, by sheer luck, missed the sight of Kitten's puckered lips entirely. By the time her eyes landed on him again, he'd already recovered his composure, and realizing where her own mind had wandered, her face flushed crimson from her hairline down to her heels. Before long, the carriage arrived at the Fräulein estate. My lady, would you care to explain exactly what's going on here? I'm sorry, everyone. Let me introduce him. This is my boyfriend. Cousin Geraldine nearly leapt out of his skin. This is far too much. As your personal guards, we've never once laid eyes on this man before. Don't tell me you've fallen for another pretty face again. Huh, it's only natural you wouldn't know him. We actually met before, at Earl Magen's party. If that's really the case, then this fellow might be nobility after all. He might dress like a mercenary, but he certainly carries himself like an aristocrat. Wonder which family he's from. Just as they were mulling this over, Belian cut in suddenly. Actually, he's not a noble, just an ordinary mercenary. The guards were stunned. That's even stranger then. Why would a hired mercenary be so close to you, my lady? Geraldine's attitude irritated Max no end, some lowly guard daring to glare at him like that. Only his teacher and his own subordinates were supposed to recognize his face. And moments like this always set his temper flaring. But for the sake of Belian's plan, he swallowed it. Belian, meanwhile, was practically glowing with pride as she explained. He rescued me, actually. He was cornered by a mob of ladies once and looked utterly miserable. But the moment I spoke up, they all scattered. So he's decided I'm his savior, and insists on repaying the favor. Actually, my lady was the one who rescued him just now, too. Isn't that funny? Looks so fierce and turns out to be this fragile. Kitten had nothing left to say to that. I didn't dislike him even then. And then, as if fate itself arranged it, we crossed paths again at Earl Enlilu's party, and then again at the marketplace. And it suddenly clicked for me. Ah, so he's the one I've been looking for all along. And with that, Belian had successfully fooled the guards. Now came the real challenge. Duke Fräulein wasn't going to be nearly so easy to deceive. Don't be too nervous, whatever happens, I'll protect you. Some protection this was, though it did put him in a decent mood. The next second, the sound of shattering glass rang out. They'd walked straight into Regis at the door, and Regis looked like his soul had left his body entirely, having just caught sight of his daughter's hand clasped in Max's. What Belian said next very nearly finished him off on the spot. Father, allow me to formally introduce you. This is my beloved. The moment the girl had confirmed her relationship with Kitten, she'd rushed him straight home to introduce him to her father, figuring that since the truth would come out eventually anyway, a direct approach couldn't hurt. But her father's reaction was far more intense than she'd expected. Even the guilty Max broke into a cold sweat under his teacher's overwhelming presence. Before either of them could say a word, Regis demanded to know what exactly was going on, his terrifying expression making it clear just how furious he was. But this was the same man who'd never once cared what outrageous nonsense she got up to before. So why was he losing his temper now? Was it because she hadn't obediently agreed to marry the crown prince? Or because she'd chosen the very student he seemed to favor most? None of that mattered right now, though. Getting her father to accept them was all that counted. And this time, she absolutely refused to bend to his will. Regis was consumed with regret. If only he'd been more careful. He never would have let this boy anywhere near his daughter in the first place. They soon reached the reception room, where Kitten gallantly pulled out a chair for Belian, a gesture that struck Regis as anything but sweet. This rotten kid. So this was how he'd wormed his way into his precious daughter's heart. Regis understood Max's true intentions better than anyone. The boy was determined to bring down the Emperor, and Belian was nothing more to him than leverage, a way to force his own hand into betraying the throne alongside him. So how exactly did you two meet? The question they'd been dreading had finally arrived. The guards had swallowed her story easily enough, but that trick would never work on her father. So Belian came clean about letting Kitten stay the night. Regis looked struck by lightning, unable to believe his precious daughter had actually slept in the same room as Max. And only when Belian quickly clarified nothing had happened between them did the knot in his chest finally loosen. If that brat Max ever dared lay a finger on Belian, he swore the boy wouldn't leave this estate alive. Why didn't you say something to Daly? He could have prepared a proper room for him. Regis practically ground the words out through clenched teeth, and Kitten felt certain he was about to be devoured alive. It was too late in the night. I didn't want to wake Daly, and besides, the knights were patrolling everywhere. It would have been inconvenient. And since he's your student, I figured he'd never do anything to hurt me. What Regis knew, and what Belian didn't, was that Max was in fact the single most dangerous presence in her life. He'd tried more than once to steer the boy's character in a better direction, but Max had already hardened into a ruthless, tyrannical man, and the moment he decided someone had outlived their usefulness, given his brutal nature, he wouldn't hesitate to hurt Belian, or worse, threaten her very life. Regis sank into deep, bitter regret. He'd made a mistake from the very start. He should never have taken Max on as a student at all. Just then, Belian's sudden words pulled him back to reality. Father, I'm ashamed to admit, I've spent my whole life pining after people who never returned my feelings. After everything I've been through, the fact that the person I love now actually loves me back feels nothing short of a miracle. I know I've lived my life in a mess and brought you nothing but embarrassment, but this time I swear I won't disgrace you. So please, let us be together. Regis was stunned into silence. Disgrace him? His daughter was the treasure he cradled so carefully he feared he might break her. Whatever Belian had ever wanted, he'd given her without question, whatever it was. Except this. Max was the one thing he absolutely could not allow. I don't approve. The two of you will end this. She hadn't expected her father to be this resolute. And despair washed over Belian completely. So this was it. He really was determined to marry her off to the crown prince, pairing his one and only daughter with a savage, unstable tyrant purely for political gain. In his eyes, apparently, marrying off his useless daughter for the sake of a royal alliance was worth more than sparing her from repeating her fated death. Kitten saw the anguish on his girlfriend's face at once, and took her slender hand in his large one. I'm afraid I can't accept that. This was his first meeting with his future father-in-law, and already the man had rejected him outright, refusing point-blank to let the relationship continue. With his girlfriend having exhausted every argument she had, it was down to him now. I'm afraid I can't accept that. Teacher, do you remember what you once taught me? That swordsmanship exists to protect what matters. That sometimes people grow stronger by protecting their own weaknesses. That someday I'd find the one person I wanted to protect above all else. I think I've finally found her. My weakness. The one thing I most want to protect. So even you cannot separate us. The next instant, Regis's furious roar rang out. Silence! Whatever you say now means nothing to me. If you continue to defy me, I won't let this go. Master or not, that changes nothing. As it happened, Regis felt exactly the same. Fine then. Since you feel that way, you are no longer my student. Neither man was willing to back down. And in the end, Max was cast out from under his teacher's wing entirely, and as he left, he made sure to take Belian with him. That was the final straw for Regis. Stop! I told you to stop! He reached out a hand to intervene. But Max, seething with fury, shot back with icy finality. Don't you dare command me. This wasn't the ending Belian wanted at all. And if she just let this happen, wouldn't it look exactly like an elopement? Father, please calm down, let me handle this. It was a side of Belian Regis had never seen before, and he froze, watching helplessly as his daughter was led away by Max. All the way there, Belian kept telling Max to stop, insisting she had something to say. When he showed no sign of slowing down, she repeated, more urgently, that it was important, and only then did he finally come to a halt. Thank you for caring about me enough to do that, but what you said to my father just now, that went too far. Max's head spun instantly. He'd only been trying to help her. That's not what I wanted. Are you sure you were really trying to help me? I never wanted you cast out from your teaching, and I never wanted to watch you speak so disrespectfully to my father. Forcing something onto someone who doesn't want it isn't help at all. That's just satisfying yourself. So you don't need my help anymore then. The next moment, his hand was enveloped in 2 soft palms. Of course I still need your help, but not through methods that drastic. I need to think of a different approach. What do you want me to do then? I want you to make peace with my father. For that to happen, someone has to apologize first. You want me to apologize first? Yes. Looking into Belian's near-pleading eyes, the words "absolutely not" died in his throat. They say the one who loves more always loses the most. And in the end, even the proud crown prince lowered his noble head. Regis, watching from the shadows, took in the whole scene with disbelief. That boy had actually listened to Belian? Had he truly changed? Not long after, the 2 of them reappeared in front of Regis. Father, I'm sorry we left so suddenly. Max has something he wants to say to you. Regis refused to believe that a boy he'd known for 10 years could change so easily. But the next moment, Max actually bowed his head and admitted his fault. And even Regis, composed as ever, couldn't help but startle. Even so, he remained certain that Max's real goal was simply to use Belian, to drag her into whatever rebellion he was plotting, and that this humble apology was probably just another part of the plan. He wasn't about to be fooled so easily. I already told you, I have no students. His teacher's unyielding tone finally opened Max's eyes. His teacher had never intended to arrange a courtship between Belian and himself from the start. He had no idea how the misunderstanding had even begun, but he decided it wasn't worth untangling now. With no sign of reconciliation between the 2 men, Belian decided to take drastic measures, dropping to her knees in front of her father with a thud. Father, I'm sorry, this is all my fault. To ease his anger, the girl knelt on the floor. Father, I'm sorry, this is entirely my fault. The 2 proud, stubborn men, who moments ago had been standing their ground, suddenly panicked. Belian, I'm the one who should apologize. Get up, I'll say sorry. But Belian knew exactly how frightening her father's temper could be, and she refused to rise until they'd finished talking. Regis lunged forward, pushing Kitten aside. All right, get up first. The floor is far too cold. Get up now. Yes, listen to your father. Get up first. But even if she stood up now, there was no guarantee her father would accept Max's apology. So Belian pleaded with him to forgive Max's recklessness, and to her shock, he agreed almost instantly. Apparently kneeling really did work wonders. Get up, please. Just get up already, please. Worn down by their combined pleading, Belian finally rose and sat back down, thinking the whole ordeal might actually be resolved easily, only for her father's voice to cut back in. I can forgive his careless words, but I still don't approve of your relationship. Even so, Belian had no intention of giving up. We're not asking you to approve right away. You can just wait and see how things go. Regis had already braced himself to refuse Belian no matter how much she pleaded, but as they say, no parent has ever truly won against their child, and he knew, in the end, she'd get her way regardless. Rather than refuse her now and risk damaging their relationship, he decided it would be wiser to simply let her have what she wanted. Sooner or later, some crisis would reveal Max's true colors to her, and once Belian finally saw the man for who he really was, she'd end things herself. With that calculation settled, Regis agreed to let the 2 of them date, delighting them both beyond words. Thank you so much, Father. Guilty as he felt deceiving someone as trusting as Belian, he told himself it was all to protect her. Being with Max would only ever bring her hardship. The scene shifts to Belian's room, where she still could hardly believe her cold-hearted father had actually agreed to let her date. Next came drafting the terms of their contract relationship. So, do you have any requirements for me? She looked up to find Kitten sipping his tea with an almost aristocratic elegance. Was this guy secretly some runaway young lord? Just as the thought crossed her mind, Max spat the tea straight back out, demanding to know why she'd make him drink something this awful. His dream of being some noble-born gentleman shattered instantly. Anyone who couldn't even tell good tea from bad clearly wasn't nobility at all. That happens to be Father's favorite premium tea, you know. Before long, Max had finished drafting his own terms, and the first item demanded that Belian see no other men for the duration of the contract. Belian nearly burst out laughing. That was precisely why she'd wanted a fake relationship in the first place. And there was one more crucial clause. Belian had to call Max by his given name. After 2 stunned seconds, she said, blushing quietly, "Then you have to say my name too, no matter where we are." Kitten's face flushed instantly, and he scratched the back of his head, muttering that he understood. But Kitten's draft was so absurd that Belian decided to rewrite it entirely in proper contract format, finally finishing just as the sun began to set. Utterly drained, she held up the finished document for Kitten to review, in case anything needed changing. He took one glance at it, then tore her painstaking work to shreds without a second thought. Belian shook with fury all that effort, and he just ripped it apart. If you have a problem with it, just say so. Thinking it over, Max had never once shown her real consideration. He'd looked after her for days and then left without a word, ignored her questions and vanished mid-conversation, and had a foul temper on top of it all. She'd let it slide before because there'd been nothing real between them, but now that they were about to sign an actual contract, they'd be seeing far more of each other, and she wasn't about to keep tolerating this kind of disrespect. Let's just call the whole contract off. The document the girl had painstakingly drafted, the man had torn to shreds after a single glance, disrespected beyond what she could bear. The girl's face went cold as she prepared to end the arrangement entirely. Proud as he was, Kitten felt as though he'd been struck by lightning. He'd only just been granted permission to date her. How could he let it fall apart now? Seeing the icy look on Belian's face, Max panicked, launching into a tirade against the tyrannical crown prince, tearing the man apart from head to toe, and desperate to win her back, spared not even himself in the process. There's no helping it, then. If we were never compatible to begin with, continuing this will only wear us both out. That's a rather rash conclusion. It's not rash at all. You tore up the contract without a second thought. Doesn't that prove you have no intention of compromising? I can't work with someone like that. Max was left utterly speechless. In truth, the habit went back to childhood. His sharp, ruthless management style had trained him to tear things apart without thinking, and no one had ever once called him out for it. Would it make you happy if someone dismissed your opinion outright? If I felt like someone was ignoring what I had to say, my pride would take a real hit, and my mood would sour for the rest of the day. So is that why you're upset with me right now? Yes, honestly, I'm quite upset. Max still wasn't ready to admit he'd done anything wrong. He'd been trying to help Belian, and now he was the one having to walk on eggshells around her. But if it's really this difficult for you to work with me, then maybe we shouldn't continue at all. After all, I'm the one who came to you for help. That thoroughly panicked him. Some instinct told him that if he stayed stubborn now, he might never see Belian again. But who was he to care about something like that? His resolve was firm. His body, however, betrayed him completely. He stole a glance at her, and found her looking as though she were on the verge of tears. And the next moment Max was bowing his head in apology, dutifully signing his name to the newly rewritten contract. After all that back and forth, the contract was finally signed. So, does that mean we can go public with our relationship right away? A few days later, Belian invited Kitten to accompany her to Countess Delrose's tea party. Max sat up instantly, deadly serious. Do you know who's going to be at that tea party? My friend Lady Enlilou and her circle. So he really had no idea Ikai would be there. Kitten thumped his chest. I'll be there without fail. He was determined to humiliate that man thoroughly, a gift for Belian, courtesy of him. His sudden burst of fighting spirit left Belian utterly puzzled. The day of the tea party arrived quickly, and Ruth and her friends nearly fainted at the sight. Ikai, who hadn't been invited at all, had shown up at the venue. Vero, entirely unapologetic, insisted she'd simply followed the rules. Whoever provides the venue is free to invite whomever they please. But I distinctly said we needed everyone's approval first. And when you invited your own friends, Lady Ruth, wasn't that a unilateral decision too? Caught in her own hypocrisy, Ruth had nothing to say. Holding others to such strict standards while excusing yourself, that's not a good look on you. At that, the very ladies who'd stood alongside Ruth a moment ago switched sides instantly. One more guest can't really make that much difference, right? Their reaction was exactly what Ikai had expected. Well then, my thanks to all of you ladies. They knew full well that Ikai's presence would be excruciating for Belian, and yet there they were, chatting and laughing without a hint of concern. An absolute pack of traitors. Just then, the door creaked open. Goodness, I arrived exactly on time. And yet everyone's already here so early? Every pair of eyes in the room went wide at once. Walking in beside Belian was a handsome man none of them had ever seen before. Desperate to see his ex-girlfriend, The scoundrel had exploited the tea party host's infatuation with him to weasel his way in, and then charmed every lady present with his silver tongue. But scheming as he was, he never could have anticipated that his ex would show up with her current boyfriend, and one who happened to be both taller and better looking than he was. The scoundrel's jaw clenched so hard the veins bulged in his neck. Ruth, the little superfan, rushed forward first. "Oh my, forgive my asking, but who is this beside you?" "He's my boyfriend, Max." Kitten's striking face left the whole group swooning, everyone agreeing the two of them made a stunning couple. The next moment, an icy chill swept in from behind. Ikai, who moments ago had been the center of attention, now found himself completely ignored, and shook with fury at the slight. Only then did Belian even register Ikai's presence, and behind her, Max glared daggers at the man. If looks could kill, Ikai would have died 10,000 times over already. Startled by the sudden hostility, Ikai's own anger flared, and he glared right back with equal intensity. To the crowd watching, this standoff between ex and current boyfriend was pure entertainment, hardly the composed decorum expected of noble ladies. But even with the evidence laid bare in front of him, the ever self-absorbed Ikai remained convinced this was all just a scheme cooked up by Belian to get his attention, using this random man to provoke him. Fine then, he thought. Today I'll wear down her patience myself. He swallowed his irritation and flashed his signature smile. "It's been a while, Belian." That sudden shift left them both baffled. She'd once been so infatuated with that very smile she'd have followed him to the ends of the earth, and now she felt nothing at all. "Long time no see," she replied coolly, leaving his outstretched hand hanging awkwardly in midair. Ignoring his humiliated expression entirely, she turned and greeted Kitten with obvious affection, and before she could finish speaking, he'd already pulled her possessively into his arms. He wanted to make it absolutely clear to that scoundrel. The only man standing beside Belian now was him, Max. To the onlookers, the provocative gesture looked nothing short of dashing. Just then, Ruth, ever the clever one, had another idea. "Since our tea party's already got one surprise guest today, I don't suppose one more would hurt, would it? What do you all think?" Belian was still feeling guilty about bringing an unannounced guest herself, but the other noble ladies enthusiastically raised both hands in agreement. A spectacle this entertaining. They might never get to witness something like it again. Things were spiraling further out of control than Belian had anticipated, and while Max's acting had held up so far, he was still, fundamentally, a bomb that could go off at any second. Just as she was about to give in helplessly, the scoundrel Ikai spoke up in objection. "He's just an accidental extra guest here. He's hardly in a position to weigh in on this," doing his absolute best to defend his idol Belian. Then a second objection came, this time from the tea party's actual host, Vero. "That's an unfair double standard, and it's only going to put Lady Belian in an uncomfortable position. Please show some restraint, Ruth." She did offer to provide Max with a separate place to rest. Though, and since Belian had been quietly worrying over how to handle Kitten anyway, Vero's solution resolved the whole matter neatly. This woman, Belian thought, seemed to have an odd sort of chemistry with her. But the moment she turned away, Vero's expression shifted entirely, and from that point on, the others kept shooting pointed looks at Ikai. "It's all that woman's fault," they murmured. The scoundrel had gone through so much trouble to get his ex's current boyfriend out of the way, and was now showing off his affection for Vero directly in front of Belian, only for his ex to remain utterly unmoved. Her indifference, though, only twisted itself into something else entirely in his mind. "See, you still can't take your eyes off me. I told you, there's no way you could forget me that easily. No matter how hard you struggle, you'll never escape me." Encouraged by this delusion, Ikai poured even more effort into playing the doting boyfriend. In truth, Belian had been worried about Vero this whole time. No wonder she'd felt such an odd connection to the woman. Vero, it turned out, had fallen for Ikai the exact same way she herself had, in another life. The way Ikai was treating her now was exactly how he'd once treated Belian, and it certainly wasn't out of genuine affection. In the end, he'd still marry the princess. And Vero's happiness, too, would shatter to pieces. Belian genuinely hoped with everything in her that Vero wouldn't end up walking the same tragic path she once had. Before leaving, Belian had warned Kitten not to cause any trouble and to wait obediently right where he was. But as far as Kitten was concerned, this was no time to sit around doing nothing. He had no idea what that man Ikai might be up to right now, and that nauseating scoundrel had set off every alarm bell in his mind. "I'm sorry, Belian, but this can't be helped. Exactly as Balian had feared, he'd come here looking for trouble after all. And the real show was only just beginning. Meanwhile, the scoundrel, still oblivious to the danger heading his way, continued playing the devoted boyfriend for all it was worth. "Vero, whenever you're free, would you like to go on a trip with me?" Vero, worn down from years of unrequited longing, had been utterly swept off her feet by his sudden change in behavior and agreed to the outing without hesitation. What she didn't realize was that she was nothing more than a pawn in Ikai's game. All he really wanted was to see Belian's reaction to those words. Because the old Belian would have flown into a jealous rage the second she saw another woman near her boyfriend. And now that he was planning an actual outing with Vero, surely she'd erupt in a public tantrum. But instead, Belian remained deep in cheerful conversation with the other ladies, barely sparing the two of them a glance. Ikai seethed with fury. He could hardly believe his own eyes. Why wouldn't Belian even look at him? Just then, the ever-clever Ruth had another idea, formally inviting Belian to become a member of their tea party circle. Belian panicked instantly, insisting Ruth was giving her far too much credit. That flash of genuine shyness left Ikai momentarily stunned. That expression, he remembered, used to be reserved only for him. "I'd like that too." To her surprise, the other ladies all raised their hands in enthusiastic agreement. This was a rare chance to grow close to women her own age. And tempting as it was, she knew her current reputation meant she could be cast aside at any moment, for any reason at all. Before she could even decline, Vero's voice of objection cut through the room. "We do have membership requirements, you understand. I'm not objecting out of spite, simply following the rules." Belian felt a flicker of embarrassment at that. "Well, if I don't meet the requirements, there's nothing to be done. Please, don't trouble yourselves over it." Her wandering gaze suddenly snapped into focus, and her pupils contracted in shock. Max had appeared unmistakably just outside the window. The teacup in her hand very nearly slipped from her grasp entirely. What would happen if any of these women spotted him? Every move she made was being tracked by that scoundrel Ikai, including, of course, her repeated glances toward the window. One look outside and his own eyes flashed with killing intent. Max, perched up in the tree, was staring right back at him. But what bothered him even more was the fact that Belian would dare exchange such intimate looks with that man right in front of him. Perhaps he hadn't even realized it himself, but he was the one who couldn't seem to let go of the past. What followed was a 300-round staring contest between the two men, until Max's expression suddenly turned mocking, and he raised a hand to his throat, miming a slitting motion unmistakably telling him to drop dead. Provocation like that no real man could let slide. Ikai had never in his life encountered someone so insufferably arrogant. He shot to his feet, claiming he needed some fresh air. Vero moved to follow him out, but he shoved her reaching hand away without a second thought, utterly indifferent to whether it hurt her. Right now, all he wanted was to kill that insolent little upstart. When the girl had loved him most, he'd barely acknowledged her. And now that she'd found someone new, he was losing his mind trying to accept it. Faced with his ex's current boyfriend's provocation, the scoundrel drew his sword and charged out after him without a word, and Max was already waiting for him. "Took you long enough, did you crawl out here?" Already furious, Ikai's rage doubled instantly, and he silently swore he would kill this arrogant brat. Meanwhile, Belian, worried about Kitten running wild somewhere, had absent-mindedly accepted Ruth's membership invitation, on the condition that she host a tea party featuring some unique blend of tea, a task she was already stressing over. Just then Vero, the party's host, approached her. "Why do you keep glancing this way and sighing during the party?" It turned out Belian's unconscious display of emotion had caught Vero's attention, especially since the man currently by Ikai's side was her. "I'm quite unhappy with Ikai, actually." Vero's eyes went wide with shock. "What exactly do you mean by that? Because I used to be manipulated by him too, constantly. I once believed wholeheartedly that his feelings for me were genuine." "Are you saying I'm being used?" Vero's whole body trembled as she said it, clearly unwilling to accept the possibility. And Belian understood that feeling more than anyone. She'd once been exactly the same. "I'm sorry if what I said upset you. That was never my intention." She knew full well she was overstepping, but seeing Vero reminded her so much of her former self that she couldn't just stay quiet. "I'll still host the tea party as promised, but if you'd rather not attend, that's entirely your choice." With that, she turned and walked away. Elsewhere, Max's expression had darkened. because Ikai was currently shouting himself hoarse. You think you can lure me out here and just walk away scot-free? You brought this on yourself. I'll knock every last tooth out of your mouth. Before he'd even finished the sentence, he lunged at Max with his sword, only for the attack to be dodged with almost lazy ease. Before Ikai could even process his shock, Kitten's flying kick slammed into his stomach, knocking the wind clean out of him. From above came Max's mocking voice. Low-born trash really does belong on the ground crawling. Someone this well-trained is no ordinary man, though. Who exactly are you, and what are you really doing at Belian's side? All he got in return was, you don't deserve to know. The next instant, a blade pressed cold against Kitten's throat. That scoundrel Ikai, without a shred of honor, had struck while Max was distracted. I let my guard down a moment ago. Say one more word out of line and I'll take your head off right here. Kitten's response was infuriatingly calm. Didn't Belian already tell you? I'm her beloved. Blood rushed straight to Ikai's head, and with the blade now a mere hair's breadth from a major artery, a furious shout rang out in the nick of time. Ikai, drop that sword this instant! It was Belian, leading a whole procession of ladies straight to the scene. Are my words just going in one ear and out the other? I said drop the sword right now. The scoundrel's face twisted with difficulty as he called out her name, only to be met with a coldness so absolute it felt like falling into ice. It's not Belian, it's Lady Fräulein. Please mind your place. The same Belian who'd once begged him to call her by her first name was now drawing a hard line between them. Because of this man, no less. There was nothing left for him to do, however unwilling, but sheathe his sword. Before he could even finish the question, Belian cut him off. Why exactly were you holding a sword to my boyfriend's throat? Wait, Belly, there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Before he could finish, Max cut in from behind her. Not Belly, Lady Fräulein. Interrupted again and again, the scoundrel's patience finally snapped, and he drew his sword, ready to end this insolent brat once and for all, only to freeze in place at his ex-girlfriend's next words. A royal knight drawing his blade this recklessly? If my father heard about this, how disappointed do you think he'd be? The next instant, she swept right past the scoundrel and ran straight to her actual boyfriend, Max, her words of concern leaving Kitten's face flushed with embarrassment, and leaving Ikai standing there alone, utterly adrift. But she'd barely taken a step before the scoundrel's hand clamped down on her wrist. I need to talk to you. Belian's face twisted in pain at the grip, and that alone was enough to strike Max's rawest nerve. He warned Ikai to let go immediately if he valued his life. Belian held up a hand to stop him. Wait, Max, just give me a moment. Calm down. Max felt as though he'd been struck by lightning. He couldn't understand it. After everything that man had done to hurt her, why was she still holding him back? His temper spiked instantly, and Belian worked hard to soothe him. I'll just say a couple of words. Can you wait for me? Max's disappointment was written all over his face, and it delighted that scoundrel Ikai to no end. Just as he'd thought, that boy had been imagining things all along. Belian had always been, and would always be, his woman. Kitten in the end did as Belian asked, and seeing that, Ikai tried to pull her aside to somewhere more private, only to be flatly refused and then warned outright. Take your hand off me right now. Who gave you permission to touch me? It was the first time he'd ever seen Belian look at him with such open disdain, and he could hardly believe it. This time, it was Max's turn to feel pleased. The overwhelming pressure radiating off him sent a flicker of real fear through Ikai, and that was exactly the effect Belian had been going for. In the past, even with Ikai's lower status, she'd always treated him as an equal. Not anymore. I told you to let go. How many times do you need to hear it? With no other option, however unwilling, Ikai finally released her. Taking action against someone without their consent, that's violence, and I'd appreciate it if you avoided that kind of behavior with anyone, not just me. Having thoroughly schooled Ikai, Belian turned and buried herself in Max's embrace instead. Ikai, refusing to give up, chased after her one more time. Why him and not me? You're ignoring me even now. What exactly is going on with you? He was the one who provoked this first. He has no manners and no respect for anyone. Are you seriously choosing to spend time with a man like that just to get my attention? This overconfident man was truly beyond saving. Did he honestly think of himself as some kind of rare treasure? For 2 whole years, she'd been the one chasing after him like a lovesick puppy, and now that their positions had flipped, it apparently felt deeply unnatural to him, all because she no longer had the faintest interest in him. But didn't you say you loved me? I did. But I don't love you anymore. The fortress he'd taken for granted came crashing down in that instant. Next time we meet, don't bother talking to me. I don't want anything more to do with you. The onlookers scattered instantly. Terrified Ikai's fury might turn on them next, while Ikai himself stood rooted to the spot, unable to process what he'd just heard. Don't love me anymore, don't want anything to do with me, was this some kind of joke? He refused to accept it. Vero, arriving late to the scene, rushed over in genuine distress and wrapped her arms around Ikai in comfort, only to be shoved off the next instant. Ikai unleashed his fury onto her instead, and Vero, trembling, her eyes wide with shock, could only stammer, "Ikai, how could you treat me like this?" Belian's earlier words surfaced in her mind then, and it finally struck her. She really had been used all along, humiliating tears spilling from her eyes. Ikai, his face twisted with something ugly and cruel, had no intention of giving up so easily. He was determined to make Belian fall for him all over again. All because Kitten couldn't sit still for even a moment. The girl had ended up unintentionally tearing into the scoundrel in front of everyone. Things had resolved themselves in the end. But Kitten's reckless provocation of Ikai was a repeat of exactly the same rash behavior he'd shown with Baron Gordon earlier. Not a shred of change. Before Kitten could stir up any more trouble, Belian decided it was time for a proper talking to. I need you to be more mindful of how you act in front of others from now on. What just happened with Ikai could have gone very badly, very quickly. Kitten, though, brushed it off entirely. 10 of that guy wouldn't be enough to beat me. Belian was thoroughly exasperated, as if his strength was even the issue here. A commoner provoking a noble was dangerous, no matter how skilled he was. One wrong move, and he could lose his head entirely. I'm not doubting your strength. I'm asking, what happens if something actually goes wrong? Kitten stubbornly insisted nothing would, and his sheer immovability finally pushed Belian past her limit. She stood backing him against the wall. I'm worried about you. No matter how strong you are, you can't afford blind confidence. The moment you make an enemy of everyone around you, they'll be watching, waiting for the one mistake that brings you down. That was exactly how the novel's Belian had lived, leaning on her father's status as the Empire's hero, holding herself above everyone else as a duke's daughter. And because she'd made so many enemies along the way, everyone abandoned her the moment it mattered most, and death followed close behind. Belian's eyes stung at the thought, and only then did Kitten grasp how serious this really was, finally agreeing dutifully to his girlfriend's request. Delighted, Belian grabbed his hand. Thank you for actually listening to me. Kitten turned away, flustered and blushing, thinking to himself, those irritating people deserved a beating regardless. But since Belian was worried about him this much, he supposed he'd show them mercy, just this once. The next day at the Fräulein estate, Kitten's eyes went wide with something close to defeat. Belian had invited him over for dinner the day before, and he'd been genuinely looking forward to a private evening for just the two of them, only to find his stubborn old teacher there too. And so Max ended up joining what should have been a cozy little dinner between father and daughter. Even though his teacher had already agreed to let them date, he clearly wasn't thrilled to have him around, and despite over a decade at his side, Max still couldn't quite read the man's temperament. This wasn't at all what Belian had wanted either. She hadn't even known her father would be home that evening. She gave his sleeve a gentle tug. If you're nervous, just sit next to me. The intimate gesture left Regis utterly speechless. In truth, the real reason she'd seated Kitten beside her was that she worried he didn't know table manners. Use the outermost spoon for the soup. Max wanted to point out he'd learned all this at the age of 5. But the look on her face, a look that said, trust me, made him swallow the words instead. Just then, the butler asked how he'd like his steak cooked, and worried he might embarrass himself. Belian took the liberty of ordering it medium, the same as hers. Kitten flinched visibly at that. He hated undercooked meat. Use this fork for the salad, and they'll clear the empty plates for you automatically. Regis, meanwhile, could think of only one thing. His precious daughter had been fooled by a man again. Trusting people this easily simply wasn't safe. Then the main course arrived, and Belian reached over to cut Max's steak for him. Kitten broke into a nervous sweat. He wasn't a child. Before he could even refuse, his teacher's voice thundered from above, and he looked up to find Regis wearing an expression of pure fury. Regis was seething, this arrogant brat, daring to have his precious daughter cut his steak for him. Allow me to cut yours instead. The bizarre offer startled Max badly. Cut what, my throat? For simply dating his daughter, His teacher was threatening to slit his neck, and Max's face went ashen with fear. It turned out to his relief that he'd misread the whole thing entirely. His teacher had only meant to cut his own daughter's steak, a single sharp slice sending blood spilling from the meat. Max thought bitterly, what an act, all this false devotion, playing the loving father when it suited him. Across the table, Max was thinking the exact same thing about his teacher, playing the part of the supportive father-in-law. Better watch himself. All that dishonesty was bound to end in bloodshed sooner or later. That subtle jab had Max grinding his teeth, since it was almost word for word what he'd wanted to say himself. Balian, oblivious to the whole exchange, broke into a cold sweat. Was there too much blood in the steak? Surely the head chef wouldn't make a mistake like that. Just then, her father's hand reached over. Give me your plate, too. Her mood brightened instantly. Before she caught herself, of course, he'd already cut his student's steak. It would look strange not to do the same for his own daughter. A moment later, her father invited them all to share tea together afterward, which only convinced Balian further that he'd genuinely grown fond of his student. Why don't you both try the tea I made today? Both their hearts skipped a beat at that. Tea made by Balian's own hand was not something to miss. Just then, word arrived from the palace summoning Regis immediately, and Balian, a bit awkward, suggested they save the tea for next time, only for her father to refuse outright. The palace can wait, Balian blinked in confusion. But that's a direct order from the emperor. The next moment, her father waved a dismissive hand. Tea matters more right now. Max agreed instantly, and with no other choice, Balian hurried to prepare the tea, though she couldn't help worrying. Was this really wise? She had no intention of offending the royal family. Regis was thoroughly pleased with the tea his daughter had brewed. It was the first time in her life he'd ever praised her for anything, and a warm feeling spread through her chest. Kitten raised his cup too, inhaling the aroma and admitting it really did smell wonderful. And even Max, who normally disliked tea, found himself impressed. Balian, though, felt anything but pleased. This only proved the tea itself was simply good quality, which meant she wouldn't need to worry about anyone testing it for poison. A quiet bitterness settled over her regardless. Regis then sent Balian upstairs to rest, insisting he had something to discuss with Max. It was, after all, time to give the two of them some privacy. Balian bowed politely and excused herself. The moment his daughter was gone, Regis's demeanor turned sharp, and he demanded to know exactly why Max was so fixated on Balian, what game he was playing. Max choked on the question, then abruptly stood. What game? The sentence died in his throat. Regis, watching him, wore an expression of complete understanding. Huh. Just as I thought, you can't even bring yourself to lie and say you love her. Balian is a girl who's carried more wounds than you know. Stop pretending to care about her just to get closer to her. At those words, something finally clicked into place for Kitten. I think I might actually be in love with Balian. That answer left Regis's head spinning with question marks. It was true, his intentions toward Balian hadn't been pure when he'd first approached her, but somewhere along the way, being with her had made him let his guard down entirely, made him feel he no longer needed to perform strength in front of her. In her presence, even things he despised became bearable. Bowing his head to apologize to her, no matter how many times, never bothered him at all. Maybe, deep down, he was simply afraid of losing her. So that's it, Regis thought. So this is what falling in love with Balian looks like. Silence settled over the room. You truly love Balian? You of all people? You can look at me like that all you want. It won't change how I feel. I'll admit, that hurt a little. I'm not some kind of demon, you know. What he didn't realize was that to Regis, he was precisely that, the demon who'd stolen his precious daughter away. I have no intention whatsoever of leaving her side. That's really all I wanted to say. Regis pressed his lips together tightly at that. This boy's sincerity, he thought, could not be trusted. In that confrontation with his teacher, Kitten had finally confirmed his own feelings. Impure as his motives for approaching Balian had been at the start, spending every day beside her had slowly drawn him in, captivated by her simple, genuine kindness. Only now did it strike him. He'd already fallen for her long ago, and no matter how hard his teacher tried to stop him, he had absolutely no intention of ever letting her go. Right now, all he wanted was to see the girl who consumed his every thought. Back in her room, Balian was still savoring how smoothly the contract relationship was going, when a sudden urgent knock startled her, and she looked up to find Max at the window, scaring her half to death. He still insisted on climbing through windows instead of just using a perfectly good door. The moment she opened it, he grabbed her face in both hands, uncharacteristically flustered. "What happened? Your face is so red. Do you have a fever? Are you all right?" She asked several times, but got no response. And then, to her surprise, he simply broke into a foolish grin, took her small hand in his, and murmured, almost to himself, "Now I finally understand." He understood at last why such vivid color had bled into his dark, colorless world, though naturally he never said that last part out loud. That left Belian utterly baffled. Was he delirious from the fever? "Are you sure you don't need a doctor?" "I'm fine." And so it went, Max staring at her without blinking, sitting far closer than necessary. To break the awkward silence, Belian changed the subject. "What did my father say to you?" He suspects our relationship isn't real?" He said it so casually it genuinely rattled her. Unbelievable. All that over-the-top acting. And her father still saw through it. "Maybe we don't act like a real couple, so I was thinking, we probably need to get to know each other a bit better." Say what you will about the man. But when it came to lying with a straight face, Max clearly had a gift for it. "What do you like?" Before Belian could answer, he jumped in first, declaring he liked swords, giving her an opening of her own. "Oh, that kind of thing. Well, I like books, and I quite enjoy flower viewing, and I love tea too." Learning even this much about her left Max positively glowing with happiness. Belian, meanwhile, grew increasingly troubled, worried whether any of this would actually fool her father. It felt like he still hadn't given up on the crown prince idea at all, and if he ever found out the truth, they'd be finished. Just then, Max finally asked the question that had been nagging at him for a while. "Do you really hate the crown prince this much?" She could hardly say the crown prince had once threatened to torture her, so she fell back on rumors instead. "I heard he even killed one of his own trusted aides once." What no one in the Empire knew was that the aide in question had poisoned him, and hearing this now, Max felt genuinely wronged. Isn't it a little rash to judge someone purely on rumor? You've never even met him, have you? Nobody's ever met a bear or a leopard either, and people are still terrified of them. A man with a reputation that notorious, I might not even survive our first meeting. There was simply no arguing with that logic, he thought. And here he was, no wolf or tiger at all, but a gentle house cat who happened to like rats. Then what if the crown prince swore he'd never harm you? Would you marry him then? She had no idea why Max was so fixated on this particular topic, but just imagining it sent a shiver down her spine. This constant talk of him was making it impossible to get the man out of her head. Desperate to move past the subject, Belian brushed it off with a half-hearted answer. "If he swore not to kill me, I suppose I might consider it." Max's whole face lit up at that, practically glowing, so all he had to do was formally promise, as the crown prince himself, and she'd agree to marry him. The thought made it impossible for him to sit still any longer. He needed to get back to the palace immediately and start repairing his image. Watch closely, the little girl was gasping for breath. "From now on, Mother's going to play hide-and-seek with you. Until I call you out, you stay hidden in the closet, understand?" The innocent child asked, "What about Father? Is he coming to find us too?" Her mother's grip on her shoulders tightened instantly. "That man is not your father. You must never ever tell him where you're hiding. He's a monster." The girl froze in terror and asked, trembling, "If the monster finds me, what will happen to Belian?" Her mother's hands closed around her throat then. "Then you'll die." But strangely, her mother's face had somehow become the bloodthirsty crown prince. Belian jolted awake. It had only been a nightmare. But why would her mother, a woman she had no memory of at all, suddenly appear in her dream like that? 20 years ago, the Ashet Empire and the Kingdom of Takiria had fought a long and grinding war. As the empire fell back on the defensive, the young emperor fled the palace. While an ordinary palace knight stood alone at the very front of the battle line, the coward and the great hero who ultimately won the war, the very same men who were now the current emperor and Duke Froilan. It was only thanks to Regis publicly declaring his support for the emperor that calls to depose him ever died down, though the common people never stopped seeing him as a coward at heart. And it was this very cowardly emperor who now held Regis's one true weakness in his grip, ordering him to depart for the south immediately. Word had reached the palace that Marquis Reynos harbored intentions of rebellion. Reynos, a man who'd once suffered defeat in the south and had studied military strategy ever since, had long argued for maintaining a standing army. And this current call to arms was, in truth, nothing more than a defensive strategy against the neighboring kingdom of Lakun's aggression. The foolish emperor was once again suspecting a loyal subject of treachery. But this time Regis had no intention of letting an order like this separate him from Belian. Regis argued forcefully that Marquis Reynos's loyalty should never be doubted, but the emperor couldn't have cared less. The real reason he'd targeted Reynos was simple. Unlike Regis, the Marquis had no leverage the emperor could hold over him. The only reason the emperor never doubted Regis's loyalty was because he held that exact leverage, and Regis had no choice but to stay in line. As for the loyalty of his other ministers, he had no way to guarantee it. And what he truly wanted was for every one of them to be leashed the same way Regis was, each with some secret held over their heads. Never had Regis encountered someone so utterly shameless. He wanted nothing more than to tear the man limb from limb, to erase this worthless excuse for an emperor from the empire entirely. But now wasn't the time. He still couldn't afford to leave Belian on her own. His beloved daughter, trapped in the very wounds he himself had inflicted upon her, a poor girl who'd shouldered every misfortune simply because she loved her unworthy father. Even if she hated him for the rest of her life, so be it. He knew full well that nothing he'd done to her deserved forgiveness. But he still hoped, more than anything, that she would remember this. As her father, there had never once been a moment he did not love her. So please, just wait a little longer for me. The instant I break free of these chains, the instant I finally earn the freedom to love you exactly as I please. Just then, Crown Prince Max arrived. It's been a while, father. His son's brazen intrusion sent a flicker of fear through him. It seems the two of you were discussing something rather important. I must admit, I'm quite curious what it could be, father. Those blood-red eyes sent a chill down his spine. As a child, this boy had never even dared meet his gaze directly. And now, after years apart, he carried himself with an air of pure, undisguised menace. If Regis really did get sent south, what exactly might this boy do while he was away? Just then, Regis stepped in. His Majesty is issuing a confidential order. Perhaps you should wait outside, Your Highness. Max's expression turned bitter at that. Duke Fräulein, you dare give me orders? If Your Highness still refuses to leave, that itself would constitute defying an imperial command. The Emperor watched, thoroughly delighted. He still had one loyal dog he could count on to obey without question, no matter the circumstances. It seemed the only way to keep the reckless Max in check was to keep Regis close by his side. So the Emperor decided to send someone else south instead. Because of the Crown Prince's unexpected intrusion, Regis's assignment to the south was scrapped entirely. The Emperor needed him here to hold his rebellious son in check. No one felt more threatened by the Crown Prince's return than his stepmother, the current Empress Elizabeth. She'd only just learned that the spy she'd sent had gone completely dark for an entire week. And a teacup went flying, striking one of her attendants square in the head. Just then, the novel's own heroine appeared, taking her mother's hand. Since my brother's back, don't you think you should go greet him properly? After all, no one else seemed remotely willing to. Elsewhere, Regis found himself feeling almost satisfied that this boy Max had actually managed to rattle his own father this badly. Just as the thought crossed his mind, a figure blocked his path. Max, who'd apparently been waiting for him the whole time. The two of them made their way to the Crown Prince's private residence, and only once every last attendant had withdrawn did Max finally remove his heavy helmet. What did you want to discuss with me, Your Highness? His teacher, calling him by title, truly was a man who never let his guard down, cautious even in complete privacy. Max wanted to know exactly what the Emperor had discussed with his teacher, but Regis refused to say. The order had been strictly confidential, which meant Max would have to dig up the answer himself. Trying to use raw authority to pressure someone was, at his current standing, still well beyond his reach. Thanks to Your Highness's little display earlier, I no longer need to travel south. So don't think that means you can keep pursuing my daughter either. Max's heart sank at that. His teacher still had no intention of accepting him, and in frustration, he sent his teacup flying across the room. Nothing was going his way today. The flying cup was caught effortlessly mid-air. That particular cup was worth its weight in gold, mind you. His original plan had been to write Belian a letter as the Crown Prince, assuring her he wasn't the monster she thought he was. But Regis had already instructed the household steward that all correspondence from the royal family was to go through him first, which meant Belian would never actually see it. He wasn't about to just sit around and accept that. Time to go find Fleur and figure something out. Just then, Victor, standing behind him, volunteered eagerly. I happen to be quite skilled at this sort of thing myself." Beneath his own helmet, his face bore a striking, 9/10 resemblance to Max's own. Victor, it turned out, served as the Crown Prince's body double, standing in for him whenever Max needed to disappear from public view. He removed his helmet, only to catch Max glaring at him instantly. "If anyone ever finds out you're an imposter, I won't forgive you." With that, Max stormed off. The next second, Victor flung his own helmet to the ground. He'd been sick of this heavy getup for ages, and would gladly toss the whole thing straight into a furnace if he could. What he never expected, though, was for Max to double back unannounced, and realizing this, Victor went pale with panic. "It's not what it looks like, Your Highness. The armor's just slippery. It slipped off, that's all." But instead of punishing him, Max actually needed his help. Victor, notorious throughout the ranks as an incorrigible flirt, was exactly the person he needed to consult on the finer points of secretly sending letters to a romantic interest. That very night, Max appeared just outside the Fräulein estate, tying a carefully written letter to the leg of a pigeon. "If you dare fly anywhere else, I'll deal with you personally. Make sure it reaches her hands directly." The terrified pigeon fled his grasp and shot off toward Bailey Ann's window. If only she'd read the letter, surely she'd feel at ease. A pigeon was fluttering frantically outside the window, seemingly panicked, pecking wildly at the glass. Was it trying to break through and get inside? At the thought, the girl dropped to her knees in fright, and when her maid appeared, she practically dove into her arms for comfort. "Melonly, quick, chase that pigeon away! How dare it try to frighten my precious lady!" Melinley snatched up a serving tray and hurled it at the bird. "Get lost, you wretched thing! Don't you dare come back and scare my lady again!" The unfortunate pigeon had no choice but to retreat empty-handed. Just then, something on its leg caught the light, and Melinley noticed a message tied to the pigeon's ankle. Carrier pigeons were typically used for secret correspondence, mostly on the battlefield, and were strictly forbidden among the nobility. Surely no one would send me a message like this. Could it be some kind of threat? Ever the worldly one, Melinley immediately guessed it must be a secret love letter for her lady. Bailey Ann shot the theory down at once. Sending a letter by carrier pigeon was hardly romantic, and besides, birds happened to be on her list of things she feared. And if it really was a love letter, why go to such secretive lengths at all? Her instincts told her this was something far more sinister. Meanwhile, the poor pigeon sat trembling, its life hanging entirely on Max's whim. He demanded, murderous fury radiating off him, to know why the delivery had failed. "Didn't I warn you? Fail me, and there'll be no mercy." The pitiful bird was practically ready to give up on life entirely. It despised every last human who abused defenseless animals. Just then, the female knight arrived, and spotted the letter still tied to the pigeon's leg at a glance. "Your Highness, what did the letter say?" "I'm not going to kill you. Why do you ask?" It's a small mercy it never reached her, honestly. A letter arriving out of nowhere from a crown prince she's never even met, combined with everything she's already heard about you. Don't you think she'd read it as something far more sinister than a failed assassination attempt? If you truly want to approach her as the crown prince, you need to arrange a proper introduction first. Max found himself, for once, at a loss for words. Finally, a competent advisor, he thought, and thanks to her, the pigeon's life was spared. The knight also brought word of Marquis Reynos's ongoing military buildup. Rumors he'd already heard that the man had long championed maintaining a standing army, and it didn't take Max long to piece together that Reynos had likely gotten wind of the neighboring kingdom of Lacoon's invasion plans. They'd also learned that the various strongholds across the south were competing over grain supplies, ostensibly to prepare for a coming famine, a convenient excuse, as it happened, for stockpiling military rations too. Max decided immediately to reach out to Marquis Reynos directly, a decision the knight strongly opposed. Any hint of movement from Reynos's camp would reach the Emperor's ears instantly, and the slightest misstep could easily be read as treason. Max saw it differently, though. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If it succeeded, not just the southern territories but the entire empire could belong to him. And with Duke Fräulein's original assignment to monitor Reynos in the south scrapped, thanks to the Crown Prince's own intrusion, the stage had essentially been cleared just for him. He intended to use this chance to win the people's hearts, quietly building his strength before his foolish father ever caught on. Worn out body and soul by the previous night's pigeon ambush, the Duke's daughter faced a taste-testing party today, with ladies from every family arriving as scheduled. Vero's attendance came as a surprise to her. Traditionally, imperial etiquette required the host family to greet their guests personally, no matter how small the gathering. But her father surely had no interest in something like that, and the thought left Belian feeling unexpectedly deflated. Just then, every lady's gaze snapped toward something at once. Goodness, is that the young lady's brother? That's not her brother, actually. Belian herself was still wondering when exactly she'd acquired a brother, and turned to find the scene utterly astonishing. Her father, personally greeting guests at this thoroughly informal little gathering. Welcome, everyone. It was something Belian never could have imagined. She hadn't even mentioned the party to him. Our respects to the Empire's great hero, Duke Froilan. You're all my daughter's friends. There's no need to stand on ceremony. I hope everyone enjoys themselves today. Being personally welcomed by the Duke himself left every lady visibly delighted. Just then, Regis leaned down, resting a broad hand on his daughter's head. Preparing all of this by yourself. Quite impressive. His unreserved praise left Belian utterly flustered. The doting look in his eyes made it clear. He really had changed. And in this moment, he looked every bit like a father who truly treasured his daughter, the kind of tender bond between them that left everyone watching more than a little envious. For this particular tasting party, Belian had prepared a specially blended floral tea, its fragrant aroma winning over every lady in attendance almost instantly, and everyone was curious how she'd achieved such a scent. As it turned out, Belian had taken advantage of a peculiar property of the tea leaves themselves. Generally speaking, when people store tea leaves,